morning, everyone. If I can ask you please to take a seat. We will soon start. We are starting. We are also live stream. So I'm Vitor de Chevy, the Executive Director of New Direction. It gives me today a great pleasure to be your MC for the day. So I will be here to make sure that our speakers will behave and will stick to the timeline. As you might know, today we'll have two big panels, one on security of supply and the second one on energy markets. But we will also have a presentation of our report that we just published a few days ago. If you don't have a copy, please grab one at the entrance. A short technical comment. If you don't speak Latvian or English, please take a headset because we'll have some part of the event in Latvian and some part of the event in English. But in order to set the tone for the event, I would like to welcome now Mr. Robert Zile, our Vice President of New Direction, also Vice President of the European Parliament since January 2022, and MEP since 2004.
Labdien visiem, prieks jūs redzēt šeit.
Good morning to everyone. I'm very happy to see you all here. Thank you
laika atrašana, kas nebūtu nav viegli Latvijā pirms jāņem. Es sākšu varbūt ar dažiem vārdiem angļu valodā, lai varētu mazliet iepazīstināt gan ar New Direction fondu, gan arī ar mūsu pieredzi šajos pasākumu organizēšanās. So, colleagues, so I would just like to introduce what New Direction is. New Direction is a foundation, which is in a European Conservative Reformist family, established somewhere in 2010 or something like that. So, and under patronage of Margaret Thatcher, we had a long experience with different kind of conferences in the framework of ECR, European Parliament support or foundation support, or New Direction support. And energy was always one of the focus what we did in this framework. And being as a political views very much single market oriented political family from different representations in different EU member states and also outside of EU member states actually used to be like UK, British Conservatives were our partners for many years, and we started its energy sector elaboration many years ago with Nord Stream 1 in Brussels. I remember, and Professor Alan Rayleigh was there. So how we met first time. It was it was before 2011, but Nord Stream 1 was established, and Nord Stream 2 was a hot issue, and Professor was here before COVID. It was not yet built Nord Stream 2. And so it was a long story. Also, we cooperating with associations like Latvian Economists Association here, and in a framework of support, we organized research papers also for energy sector last year, chaired by Olga Bogdanova, who is also here. So there is a new paper which will be presented today, also about energy sector issues. So in our view, this is an absolutely crucial sector, which of course influence many other branches of economy, starting from mobility-related issues, agriculture, and so on, and manufacturing definitely. So that's why these changes in energy policy are absolutely crucial for everybody of us and any business, any citizen. Now I will switch again to Latvian.
Since the times I just talked about, a lot has changed. We know Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 are no longer functional, maybe will never function again. In the EU, we have worked on the 55 package. Many laws have already been accepted, but not all of them. There are new objectives, not only for 2030 regarding objectives in the climate-related area, but there will be a Commission proposal for 2014 next year, and then this interruption between 2030 and 2050 in order to make these objectives feasible. What else has happened? We had the pandemic, which had a great influence on the global energy industry, and of course the war in Ukraine, which has turned the geopolitical situation upside down. And we will talk about this, thinking about energy security and market organization. What I am always happy about when we talk about these issues is that we talk about the energy security rather than the energy independence of separate member states, as some try to do. In today's Europe, energy independence is not a feasible prospect, and it makes no economic sense. So the focus is energy security, which is also what we have focused on in the panel, in the paper, and we will talk about this in our discussion today. Of course, we have a regional focus that is clear. We have the Baltic and North Sea part. We will not talk about the situation in the Mediterranean today, for example. And the Nord Pool geographic area is the focus of the conference today. But I assume that in the keynote there will be global aspects mentioned as well. So if we cast a glance over the situation today and look at the events of recent past, especially the season of last year, there was a lot of fear that many energy resources might run out, for example, gas and some others. And there was also concern of whether we will pay too much to create the reserves for the winter season. Some did pay too much, but it's not too bad because we had enough gas storage. There was, of course, an opportunity to make a great profit for some participants of the market. This is also something policymakers need to keep in mind. There was the idea of taxing the windfall profits. In some parts of the EU, this was practice, but this is a matter of great discussion. And this was mostly related to solar and wind power, which was not well developed in the Baltic area. But of course, there are contradictions on national level if we look at the situation. How the green hydrogen definition has not yet been resolved on the EU level, and whether the hydrogen and nuclear power is or is not a green power. We can see a conflict here between Germany and France. There are political national interests. Quite recently, we saw in Belgium and the Netherlands, where government heads it ended up with a bad result for the ruling PMs. The countries that produce renewable energy are allowed to use more fertilizers or pesticides that are of chemical nature. And some countries seem to be more privileged than the other countries that produce less renewable energy. So there is a lot of conflicts there. But of course, the devil is in the details. Ursula von der Leyen had a very interesting visit in Chile, where many EU companies are active and discussing about changing the energy market organization in Chile, because these companies invested in Chile in order to create green hydrogen using the renewable opportunities in Chile. The lithium mines in Chile, for example, but the organization of the Chile market is not very favorable for these processes. So there is a desire in Europe and also in the US and China to distance the production and extraction locations for renewables, because we see a desire to develop the sites where we generate energy and to distance them from the place where this energy is consumed. I think this is also related to national interests. I will just show you a couple of slides in relation to this. I hope you can see the information on these slides. This is as regards mobility. So in order to produce one car, we need this amount of kilograms of materials. So for electrical car, it's more than 200 kilograms, where we have copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, graphite, and also rare earth materials. And what we don't have in the conventional car, on the right bar, there's completely different structure and amount. This is something we need to keep in mind in order to quickly move in our mobility area to electrical vehicles. We need to keep this aspect in mind. Next, on electricity generation, there is a similar situation regarding minerals that are required in offshore wind generation. Next, onshore wind generation. Next, we have solar, nuclear, coal, and natural gas sources. And you can see the minerals that are necessary in order to enable these sources. And most of these minerals are not available on the European markets. And this is another question that we see quite often when we talk about heavy and light rare earth metals that are very important in this industry. Quite often it is said that their amount on the market is not as great. Experts say it's about 9 billion per year. At the same time, the impact of these materials is 7 trillion, meaning that if we do not have these materials, this business cannot develop. Another thing is, in order to extract these materials, in order to start the production, we need 10 to 15 years in order to start a new production type for extracting these resources. So we are now in 2023, we added 10 to 15 years, so that is where we have the bottleneck, and also in Europe and here on the Baltic shores, we need to consider these matters. And another thing, next, we can see where most of these materials are coming from. We can see from this geography that China has a commanding role. There we have scattered sources, including some countries in Europe, but it is obvious that Europe cannot gain control on this market. So, for example, for cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there is a question who is extracting this material. It's not the local people, mostly it's Chinese companies, and these materials go to China and make up the market of China, which is also an important element. And in conclusion, I will have a couple of slides on the wind power generation, which is well developed in Europe, but here again we have to look at the details. And this also impacts our political decisions, and that is how it just is. These are the production plants constructing various components for wind generation systems. We have 3 centers: Denmark, Germany, and the Benelux, the Netherlands, Belgium, and of course Spain. This has come about historically and is related to an objective how this business was worked on in these countries. Another thing is, for example, the dark red circles is for producing blades, and the gearboxes, the light green circles. These are major inputs, so it takes a lot of investment, a lot of capital to create these sites, and it has the greatest added value, and we can see where these sites are right now. And we need to understand that this is an essential element when we think about who exports what, who imports what, when it comes to renewables. As I always say, it's important to understand where the added value ends up. So we have a lot of wind generation onshore and offshore in Latvia, but it is not the territory that exports, it's the business that exports, and that is the crux we need to understand when we develop our own capacities and think about how we should build our energy policy in these very dynamic and shifting times. And that is also what we will talk about today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, for making a very clear link between markets and, of course, the security of supply, but also for underlining the fact that with the new technology, maybe we can also have new challenges in terms of security of supply. Now I would like to give the floor to Alan Wiley, the non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. The floor is yours.
Right. Okay. So I don't need a microphone. Oh, no, I'm linked up. I've got, yes, okay. I've forgotten that. Right, okay. So the title of my talk is Taking Energy Security Seriously. And you may think that after this energy crisis over the last 18 months, that we will be taking energy security seriously. And my contention is that we are not. Let me give you an example from yesterday. Yesterday, the Dutch government announced that, yes, indeed, it was going to close the Groningen gas-fired the gas field, Europe's largest gas field, on the 1st of October. That will take another 4 billion cubic meters of supply out of European supply. It has already seen an increase in gas prices in Europe as a result. Germany still closing all its nuclear power plants. In the UK, the leader of the opposition has indicated that there should be no more oil and gas exploration. It should stop. The UK, by the way, provided they increased their gas production last year by about a third, which helped fill European storages. I understand why those decisions are being made, but it doesn't take account of the seriousness of the situation we face. Yes, the sun is shining, but the market structure is weak. The truth is that we have very little additional gas supply until probably 26, 27 at the earliest. There's very little global additional supply. The position for us overall is weak. It would not take many things to go wrong for our situation to become desperate again, and this I'll explain in a little detail shortly. So my approach is, first of all, we have to take it seriously, we have to think strategically, and we have to look at some credible solutions to get us through this period before we can talk about net zero and the energy transition. If we can't keep the lights on, we're going to have very difficult building political support to do anything else. So, of course, one understands at some level the complacency. The sun is shining, as I said. Gas stocks are high. The TTF, the main gas hub, prices are much lower, almost sort of normal. And you can say at some level that this constitutes success. I would say at least the energy crisis wasn't as terrible as the European Council thought it might be in April 2022, when they were discussing in private, would we have to run a war economy in Europe? And that's true. Nevertheless, it's pretty bad. Fuel poverty has been ramped up across the European Union because of these high prices. Businesses have suffered, consumers have suffered. We've had to pay out about €500 billion in protective measures, and for the first time since 2010, Europe as a whole is in trade deficit to the tune of about 300 billion, i.e. buying a lot of gas at top dollar prices on international spot markets. And even this success was only because we had low Chinese demand. Chinese demand fell dramatically because of for liquid natural gas, because largely of the COVID lockdowns imposed by the Chinese government on the economy, and because we had unseasonably, amazingly warm weather. And that allowed Europe to essentially see its way through this winter. Now, it is true that you could say, well, we might be looking next winter, but I don't think look is a strategy that you want to rely upon. Increased Chinese growth and a cold winter could rapidly change the picture. And even if Chinese growth isn't as great as we fear, and that is possible, I mean, there are indications that the Chinese economy is not firing on all cylinders, is not doing as well as some analysts thought it would. However, Russia gets a vote. And you have to remember that they have options. One option, very simply, is to cut the remaining LNG supply that's provided by Russia into Europe. Because whilst the pipeline gas flows have been cut, Russia is the second largest provider of liquid natural gas to Europe. So they could cut that. They could even cut the Ukrainian transit flows, and they could cut Turkish Stream. Now, of course, that would upset Serbia and upset Hungary. But if Russia is in an existential war, so they say on their national TV, against NATO, and if they're in this existential war to win, then they're willing to sacrifice their allies. And they may well be willing to do that. And of course, the Russians understand that there's a significant degree of supply fragility for Europe. They understand how the markets work. Putin himself personally understands how the markets work. They are prepared, understand our vulnerability. They're prepared to be aggressive in order to deliver what they want and cause market distortions. So our vulnerability remains. So we have to take European energy security seriously. I think one of the questions that I then turn to is what is the foundation of our energy insecurity? And I would argue it goes right back to the 1960s, to the original deals done by Western European nations and enterprises and the Soviet gas ministry in the 1960s. And that provides, in two ways, it provides the basis of our insecurity. Partly it's this physicality of the networks which were created at the time, which created an enormous degree of supply dependency. And the second was almost psychological, was that in Western Europe there was this belief in mutual dependence. In the Soviet terms it was gas for hard currency, and later on is that we would all develop tremendously well together because of this mutual interdependence. And always that overlooked the reality that whilst it may well have been quite good for Western Europe, it was never good for the occupied states of Central and Eastern Europe and indeed for Ukraine. In fact, there is a book by Gustav Thafferson who's written this book called The Gas Bridge, which he actually, going through all of the Ukrainian records, he found a story from 1975 where the Soviet Union was sacrificing Ukrainians in order to provide gas to Western Germany. So even before the end of the Cold War, you have got gas being provided to Western Europe and Central Eastern Europe and Ukraine suffering as a result. And then after the end of the Cold War, we have endless numbers of cut-offs, threats of cut-offs across the whole of Central Eastern Europe and indeed of Ukraine. None of this had any impact on the Western Europeans. There was a simply lack of appreciation and understanding, and even when the 2009 gas crisis occurs, which should have been the waking up call to Western Europe, it didn't happen. Instead, they pushed ahead. We had Nord Stream 2. We had, even most amazingly of all perhaps, was Germany permitting the acquisition of gas storage by Gazprom in Germany as part of a gas for assets storage swap. And this builds out the foundations of our energy insecurity and permitted Russia to do what it did in the energy crisis over the last 18 months. So when I talk about sleepwalking into an energy crisis, I have a real sense of this, because in June of 2021, I went into the Berlaymont And I talked to senior EU officials, and I said, there is something very, very strange going on. Ordinarily, every spring, late spring, early summer, gas flows across the east to west interconnectors to provide gas into storage in all the European storages. And essentially, in the spring and late summer of 21, it became clear that that wasn't happening. The supply wasn't going in. In fact, supply was reducing. All of the normal storage wasn't happening. And it was very difficult to get any traction from the EU institutions. I'm saying this is strange. Some of the energy analysts were also saying this is strange. Some of the market reporters were reporting this. And essentially, there was silence from Brussels. We got very little traction on this issue. And my initial thought was that it was perhaps some sort of Russian game being played in order to try and force through the regulatory approval of Nord Stream 2. Now, of course, we know the reality of it was an attempt to soften up Europe before they launched the attack on Ukraine. But it was interesting the way nothing really happened. Prices increased. Commissioner Timmermans' only response in October of 2021 was to talk about, to start with, that this was another example of why we needed to switch more rapidly over to renewables and not rely on expensive energy-secure fossil fuels. Now, I understand where he's coming from, but when we look at this, this takes me back to my point about energy insecurity. When you dig down into this, it shows you Europe's vulnerability. The half of the deficit of gas storage by October 2021 was caused by Gazprom. Gazprom storages in Europe. Gazprom only owned only about 10% of European storages, but virtually all their storages were empty. Some of the storages were as low as 5%. That's on a kind of 5-year average. So we have a really good sense of them deliberately pushing out all of their storages, using all of the not bringing anything in, and draining them to leave Europe in an incredibly energy insecure position. And nobody appears to be in the German government or at EU level was actually getting to grips with this until very, very late in the day. Then, in late autumn, we essentially have panic. Europe wakes up. And then we have, I say, rapid measures and huge budgets. And that then raises a whole number of other questions. Well, we haven't really, we end up doing all of the sort of the wrong things in the right order, or the right things in the wrong order. Chaos takes place. One of the issues is the lack of cooperation. So it's okay for Germany to go out and spend tens of billions of dollars on top dollar gas. But what about other states? Where is the cooperation? Where is the solidarity? And there was far too little of that in a situation of extreme energy security danger for Europe. And that, of course, is then massively accelerated, this crisis, by the onset of the Russia-Ukrainian war, and then Russia seeking to squeeze us even more. First of all, with the rubles game, where suddenly Putin, in an illegal presidential decree, a presidential decree illegal under the Russian constitution, he announces that suddenly payment has got to be made in rubles. And this is an attempt, first of all, to try and muddy the waters, create confusion, and make it more difficult to continue gas flows, to further squeeze the Europeans. Then simply a lot of gas is, gas flows, even under long-term supply contracts, are stopped, reduced, and then finally Nord Stream 1 is, for various engineering reasons, the gas flows are stopped. And finally, at the end of September, the pipeline is blown. All of this is putting on more and more pressure onto the European markets. We go to 10 times normal prices. We have a lot of chaos with member states paying out enormous amounts in budgets, EU crisis measures, all of this coming in a degree of chaos and an inability to appreciate what we're doing. Everything is tactical, very little is strategic. So where do we stand now? And I look at the state of play going into next winter. And my view in all of this is that there should be no complacency. Now, I agree, okay, energy prices are currently lower, they're almost normal, and gas storages are filling up. But you have to remember that the European gas storage system is developed in the basis that you could always get more gas from Russia. So the whole structure is based on the idea that if there was a cold winter, you can then ramp up European gas supply. That is why the Ukrainian pipeline network has huge capacity. It has 150 billion cubic meters of capacity, most of which is not used. But in a cold winter, you can ramp up gas through storage. If we have a cold winter, we will have some serious trouble. Equally, as I explained earlier, we had low Chinese demand. Now, there will be some higher Chinese demand. How much, we don't know. That is another issue. The other problem is simply the tightness of LNG gas supply. There is hardly any additional gas supply, liquid natural gas, until around 26, 27, possibly 27, 28. And as I say, the Russians have a vote. They can cut LNG, they can cut pipeline gas. And the other thing to think about in these terms is potential for sabotage. One of the things which worries me is that all of the confusion and doubt over who blew up Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, and more recently over the dam, patently obvious that it was the Russians, but the doubt, the balance in the European and Western media creates another problem. It's probably making Moscow think, well, if they're not blaming us for the Nord Stream explosions or the dam, or not directly, with a bit of disinformation, we can blow the UK-EU gas interconnector, or perhaps the Norwegian-EU interconnectors. Or we can blow the Baltic pipeline, or the Baltic interconnector, or all of them. And they won't actually be able to pin the blame on us. They'll be confused. Although theory, you could argue it's Article 5, we can create enough chaos around that argument by flooding the disinformation zones that we can essentially get away with that. And the less robust approach we take to attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, the greater the likelihood it is that they will attack our infrastructure. And you can imagine a situation, a cold winter, where prices spiral, we don't have enough gas, we're finding it difficult to get it on global markets. The temptation for the Russians to act is there. And I think this is why we must have very little, no complacency in this situation. And this takes me to my kind of overall strategic point, is that we have to develop an energy security strategy for Europe in wartime. We have to assume the worst case scenario. We have to plan on the basis of the worst case scenario in order to deter the worst case scenario happening. We have to assume that the Russians will contemplate sabotage, and we have to think about how we will focus down on all those potential threats. We have to jettison ordinary peacetime concerns. One of the approaches I have with this, which will create a degree of deterrence, I think, is an emergency energy security pact amongst EU member states, which would be to say that the Dutch will be prepared to switch back on Groningen, the Germans will be prepared to put on their nuclear power stations. You just go through what everybody doesn't want to do, but is prepared to do in time of war, because that is what we're facing, equivalent to war. And we need to have a credible, a realistic approach to those worst case scenarios, and something which is operative, which can work, so that, and that alone, having that in place and being willing to say that we will do that, will probably deter it. Which takes me to my essential point about how we deal with this going forward. The problem isn't just the issue with the long 1960s foundational relationship with Russian gas as the origin of our energy crisis. The other major factor is the focus on the energy transition to the exclusion of actual energy security. We need essentially to ride two horses. We need to ride the energy transition horse and the energy security horse at the same time. And until we get out of this, we need to do this. Until we have a comprehensive transformation of the energy system, which is entirely workable and deployable, we need to focus on both. And I entirely accept the argument of parts of the Green movement that this will end up with stranded assets. Yes, we will, but stranded assets are a lot cheaper than spending $500 billion a year on subsidies and protection measures for our industry and consumers because of a major energy security crisis. We also need to be realistic about the future and what role is Russian gas going to play. There's a very real danger that we won't get enough LNG, for example, because the fear of, say, US LNG producers is that as soon as the war is over, it'll be back to business as usual with Russia. So we need to create a legal structure which controls all Russian gas imports for the future. My own preference at the moment, and I'm kind of working a paper on this, is to argue for a maximum amount of Russian gas which will be imported to Europe at a fixed price with a single European buyer, and then the gas is sold by auction onto European markets so it doesn't distort the price, and the profits from that are then used for Ukrainian reconstruction. Something like that would control it and guarantee most of the market is open to other private sector actors who are not going to threaten our security, whilst providing some degree of control for the European Union over Russian gas. Now, my overall point with all of this is that we should not be complacent. We should recognize the vulnerability that Europe faces. And we need to develop a practical twin-track energy security strategy for the future. And on that point, I'll stop.
Thank you, Alan, for your very pragmatic speech. Thanks to you, I think we are not able to face reality, but also you came up with some pragmatic solutions. I think that's what New Direction is always aiming to. Now we will move to our next item on the agenda. It will be in Latvian for the non-Latvian speakers. I would like to invite Rota Snuka and also Reinis Albotins, who is now taking the headset, yes? To the stage for the next panel. So you will make a short presentation of the study that you deliver to New Direction, who is in English. You can, of course, have a hard copy at the entrance, but you can also download the report on our website. Rota, the floor is yours.
Paldies, tā. Es mēģināšu tikt pie slaidiem.
Thank you. I'll try to access my slides.
Tā, es saprotu, ka tagad es nedaudz jums tādu refleksiju no iepriekšējā runātāja.
Here you can see a quick overview of you just heard, and here is our presentation. While Reinis is being equipped with the mic, I will start. I think all of you noticed the low prices last Saturday, Sunday for electricity, minus 10 euros per megawatt hour, and you thought what else I could charge during this time. And you also probably noticed this week when the price approached 100 euros and even more. I would like to say that when the price is low, the consumers are happy, and when the price is high, then the producers are happy. But unfortunately, policymakers, they have to deal with making energy available and affordable. That's why we looked at the measures implemented. If we look back at last year, where there was a significant risk that there could be no energy available, and therefore we considered the international level, what happened in the world and what happened in Europe, what measures were implemented. And our main conclusions were such that regardless of the price, be it high or low, it might be caused by emergencies, but it's not the result of market shortcomings. Of course, the market is regulated since 1986. There have been the first electricity market packages where the European market is being regulated. Of course, there have been some changes since then, but our main conclusion is that for market as such as it is constructed now, it should be able to regulate the price. There is also the new European electricity market entity, where the things that did not work so well in the past are being solved. But today I will not speak about that. I will speak about whether we assume the risk on the short term or we are looking for a stable price in the long term. And then we have to once again talk about what is the long-term price for which we would be ready to enter into a contract. Next, energy supply security and its definition. As good researchers, we looked at the literature, what this security could actually mean, although it will probably not be anything new. What is interesting here is it depends on how it is viewed by the importing and exporting country. The importing country, like Latvia in the EU, talks about energy security and the security of supply. The exporting countries, also Russia in the past, talk about the security of demand. Another interesting thing, transit countries talk about the reduction of risk in order to avoid the price risk, so that they would have a constant flow and constant business. We use the definition provided by the International Energy Agency, meaning that the security is a constant supply at affordable prices. What we included was the long-term time frame, and many things from the last year should be viewed as emergency measures. So there are four things regarding availability that we considered, and the fourth on the side of price. Without going into too much detail, first, the storage of gas. I think the previous speaker gave a wonderful description of this. And I also think that even if there was no European regulation last year, the storages would have been filled anyway. As regards the collective procurement of gas, I think this is a very curious measure, and working on this paper, I also looked at what was done in Japan after the Fukushima disaster. The LNG prices were very high, and the energy producers came together and created a common procurement. And as far as I know from the latest news, this company has formed a union with a South Korean company, creating one of the biggest procurements in the world, which also entails risks for Europe. First of all, next about the fall in demand of gas and electricity. In Finland, it was a fall of almost 50%. And it's interesting because Finland is now starting to consume more It's because their industry is very flexible as regards what the resource they are consuming. So they are always choosing the cheapest one. And diversification of manufacturing, and this is more has more to do with the renewables and energy efficiency, which in EU were short-term measures like licensing. Next, about the pricing side of things, these are measures that we did not view in a positive light. For example, EU said that you can regulate the price that is below the market price. That is something we can launch, but it's difficult to wind up. And then we have 180 euros per megawatt hour, this magical number, and this can also be looked at from two sides. From the one side, yes, the price was very high, much higher than manufacturing costs, but from the other side, if this was invested in renewable resources, then today we would be able to have a completely different energy balance. Solidarity investment from fossil fuels, which was introduced in some member states, this was one of the most controversial measures, and there were trials, court proceedings regarding this. Companies had a windfall profit, but on the other side, it was short-lived. And there was a market correction mechanism that was introduced when the prices stabilized, this magic 180 euros per megawatt hour. And right now it's operating on a surveillance level. So some of these measures could be used and considered, and some would have taken place even without these mechanisms. But to a certain extent, we have managed to deal with the crisis. We also looked at our national measures, and here we have a very interesting picture. If we look at a per capita level between Germany and Luxembourg, for example, they paid more than 3,000, and Finland paid between 200 to 300 euros per capita. So this means there is a massive disproportion between EU member states. A very interesting thing here, although the measures are somewhat similar, but it's different because in Latvia we have central heating system. As for impact, in Latvia everything was short-term, and here we can have a look from two sides. We introduced and cancelled measures in the market, but on the other side, while we have long-term measures in the EU, that's because some countries used it to implement energy efficiency measures. And I see Rein has been equipped with a microphone, so I would like to give the floor to him to tell about his view about the next winter. Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. I was so interested in what Alan said that I forgot to get my mic, but I hope you forgive me this little oversight. Many of things were said very accurately, but for yes, my comment on the impact side of things, I think it's one of the main conclusions that we arrived at, considering all the changes over the last 18 months. We concluded that it is important not to fix what ain't broken. So market has worked very well, considering the extreme conditions that we had over the last year and a half. So market participants, considering the design and structure of the market and how it could develop in the future, we analyzed scenarios and considered various risks in order to factor in these risks into various processes and market development. But at the same time, it's very unlikely that anyone could forecast that one country in Europe would attack another European country. and manipulating with energy markets beforehand and doing it on a global level in order to make EU very vulnerable and unable to act and make decisions. Luckily, this did not come to pass. And the major risks in EU member states as regards these processes were such that as there was a risk that governments would start to just spend money willy-nilly and just give it away. But there were certain preconditions. In some countries there were election or pre-election period which made the situation even worse. There was panic and lack of understanding how to proceed, how to act, and therefore there was great concern what we could expect from the next 6, 8 or 12 months. In the EU member states that have central heating systems and that is mostly powered by gas, whether they would be able to survive this heating season without a social economic catastrophe. There were two scenarios. First, that the EU member states would get cold feet, would cast away all their green objectives, the economic transformation, low-carbon economy transition, forget about all of this, and would go for an even greater dependency from this one supplier of natural gas. This is a good resource, but only as long as it is available and affordable, and as long as no one is using it against you in order to limit your options and eliminate your capacity to make decisions. The other scenarios was that this would be an event that would shake that would disrupt the situation. And this is a term used in analytics quite often. And in this regard, the war Russia launched against Ukraine really did disrupt the situation and caused such fundamental changes in the EU member state treatment in the energy sector. It highlighted how very serious these matters are, that we need to cut our dependency on a single supplier and to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels as such. As I said, fossil fuels are not evil in themselves, but there are very negative consequences when in our energy mix there are a lot of fossil fuels, and most of these are supplied by a single country. But still, these impacts could have been long-term because the forecasts were not looking good. Essentially, nobody knew what would happen. It was just a shot in the dark. Here it was very important for EU member states to understand that the support measures, be they for people or for companies, they have to be transparent, limited in time, and that they could not last forever. This was a force majeure situation, and it should have been treated like that. Because in addition to various bad side effects that such long-term support could have, including to households, it would totally knock off track any incentives to invest in energy efficiency, and then we could forget about energy efficiency as such. It is harmed by low prices or by subsidies to energy resources. Short-term, transparent support is the best solution. So what we can expect? Roberts and Alan already said, we cannot say 100% what will happen. There are factors that we just cannot know, but we can apply the scenario approach. We can look at the facts that we have. One factor that we can always take into account is the seasonality of energy consumption. Its cyclic nature So there is a lower demand when the heating is not necessary or the businesses don't use that much natural gas. But also the heating season, especially in the Baltic Sea region, is a thing we cannot use without natural gas. So it means we will have a time to prepare for these uncertain times in the future, although all data point to the fact that natural gas and its reserves in storages are much better than in the past. Some lessons have been learned in a harsh and very quick way. We have made the necessary conclusions, and those who were dependent on the Russian Federation for their supplies have very quickly, in 1 year, changed their supply channels and sources. The global market has been reorganized in order to adapt to the new situation. It has adapted not only on the side of consumption, but also on the side of demand. And I think that is the good message here. It is the perfect scenario where the market itself is able to adapt and learn from the mistakes in the past. And also pay much more heed to the risks that are significant. And also in the next winter, at least for now, while natural gas is a very important resource in the energy mix in the EU and at least in some member states, we will be dependent on what the demand for natural gas is in the prime markets. So we need to talk about not only the prices in TTF in Europe or in the European in the national balancing point in the UK, but also in the Japanese and Korean markets in Southeast Asia, what the consumption is in Japan, China, South Korea, and so forth, and also what is happening in India. If the weather conditions are such that these countries will have cold weather, then these countries will have to pay more because natural gas LNG goes to the customer who is ready to pay the best price. Of course, we cannot exclude the situation that there is a measure that states, yes, we need to be act in solidarity. And I think we can be grateful that the global community has finally realized how to deal with these risks and that some level of cooperation in addition to what is being done by the market itself is necessary in order for everyone to survive and for the market to go on as well.
And of course, economic growth is another factor that will have an impact on this. We are always waiting what the US Federal Reserve is going to say and what the growth rate of China will be, because if the Chinese economy will grow, then the markets will react subsequently. Yes, what else? Now I'm thinking, I think it's 11 o'clock now. Well, maybe just a couple of more minutes. If we look at the changes with regard to future prices in the Dutch TTF market, then we can see, maybe you don't see it, but in the presentation you are able to see that there is quite a peak 12 months ago, but now we are back to future prices that we had practically 2 years ago, approximately plus minus 24 months. This is not a bad sign, but at the same time we need to remember that the risks are still there, and therefore I would invite everyone to keep in mind what Alan just told us concerning risks, that the risks are there. Let's not be too optimistic, even though the markets have managed to work with the situation. Nevertheless, we must be ready to react anytime. Talking about strategic planning, I don't know if Rota would like to use the opportunity to say some words about this, but for me it's clear that the recent events showed that strategic planning in energy sector is crucial, and also with regard to energy supply. Maybe Western European countries were a bit too relaxed looking at plans of European Commission with regard to energy and climate. And I think that now the situation has fundamentally changed. And after this last 18 months, when the market fluctuated very dramatically, and we had to make the decision which path to choose and which scenario to develop, I believe in this situation everyone understood that the plans are not just for the sake of planning. These are plans which are comparative, so that we all together as a collective community, as European Union and also economic community, may proceed in a systemic and understandable way towards low-carbon economy by using more renewable energy resources and gradually stepping back from fossil energy resources that we must import as European Union. And therefore we have to analyze the development plans of operators, also the national member states in their strategies. We also have to analyze what the European Union is planning to do with regards to renewable energy resources, hybrid technologies, supports to energy efficiency measures, and of course the national energy policy plans have become very, very important, and I think this has kind of regained new importance in light of past events. If Rota wants to add something, that this is the moment, and if not, then thank you for your attention. You will have an opportunity to ask questions, and for now, this is it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ainis. Thank you also to Rota for the good presentation. We will still promoting the report until we will give away all our copies, and I think that is a very good report because it can be used to understand what is happening now, but I'm sure that in even a few years some solution will still be found in your report. Now we will have a short coffee break. We will try to start at 11, 20 past 11 sharp, if it's possible. And also, if you have some questions regarding the first speeches, please keep them for the first panel. Rob will also allocate a few minutes for these questions to the first speakers. Thank you very much. See you in 15 minutes. So our next panel will deal with the main question that we already tackled this morning, the question of security of supply. And I will now give the floor to Robert Tyler, our senior policy advisor, in order to moderate the panel. And please don't forget that also we will use some minutes to ask questions to the previous speakers. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And as we've already established this morning, security of the energy supply is perhaps the most important and existential question that we need to answer in Europe today. And it's an area that really impacts every level of society. I mean, just yesterday I was in a shop and I was talking to the owner and asking how business was, and he himself was saying that energy is his biggest expense at the moment. He's saying of everything that is that is impacting his business, it's energy first. So you can see that it's a sort of multi-layered thing. And in order to address this, we've managed to pull together a panel that will address just about every different layer and perspective when it comes to energy security. Martin Čačić will present the business side of the debate. Liga Kurevska will present the Latvian national government perspective on this. Liliana Smersh will present the sort of regional perspective looking at the 3 Seas initiative. And Diana Fertil-Roft will present the sort of American transatlantic perspective of energy security. So we'll be able to address it from every layer and hopefully have a very interesting discussion afterwards. So I think let's start at the highest layer, so to speak, and I'll give the floor first to Diana.
Well, thank you very much. All of you for coming. Robert, thank you so much for inviting me. I'd like to start with a story. Once upon a time, that's how stories always start. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful country called Akirema. After many years of energy shortages, Akirema found that it had huge reserves of oil and natural gas. It was energy independent, and its air became gradually cleaner as its newfound natural gas displaced its coal. Then, Akirema's rulers decided that a change was needed. Instead of using its own bountiful supplies of oil and natural gas, Akirema would become dependent on its worst enemy and would use solar panels, wind turbines, and give up its beautiful gasoline-powered cars for electric vehicles. Well, this fable is a true story, and Akirema is America written backwards. That's because America's current policy is backwards. America's policies to turn to wind turbines, solar panels, electric vehicles with batteries made by China makes China stronger and America weaker. China makes about 70% of wind turbines and solar panels, and about 80% of the batteries for electric cars. China has lower costs for energy because it uses coal-fired power plants. It has not agreed to any emissions reductions, so its energy costs are lower. Its labor costs are lower because it uses slave labor from Xinjiang and child labor to mine all the minerals for its batteries, some of which are mined in Africa, and China has bought up huge swaths of Africa that have the minerals for electric batteries. Its costs of capital are lower because it can subsidize its favored companies, such as CATL, the big battery manufacturer. Well, this won't reduce global emissions. America's policies won't reduce global emissions because displacing energy-intensive manufacturing from the United States and moving it over to China just moves emissions from one part of the globe to another. And it's global emissions. It is global emissions that many say are responsible for climate change. Over the past 15 years, China's emissions are up 5,000 million metric tons, whereas America's emissions are down by 1,000 million metric tons. Using Chinese technology raises electricity prices in the United States, making GDP growth lower and reducing jobs for Americans. Stellantis, Ford, and GM have been closing factories, and these jobs have been going to China, where the electric batteries are made. This makes food more expensive because fossil fuels are used for fertilizers to grow food. So it raises the price of food, and all this raises the price of inflation. There's 3 reasons why Americans don't want to drive electric vehicles: cost, convenience, and climate. These vehicles are more expensive. They are inconvenient because you have to stop to recharge. And in cold climates, the batteries lose range very quickly. so that a battery loses 20 to 40% of its range. That again weakens the whole fabric of society, where people in America used to be able to drive to jobs outside the public transit system, because America is a very large country and public transit does not serve everywhere in the United States. Well, this fable isn't just applicable to the United States. There's other places also that have natural resources they could use that they're not using in favor of more expensive forms of electricity. And it's important that we look locally, we rely on our own resources, we don't rely on groups that can shut off our energy sources. And I'm talking not just about China, of course, but Russia, OPEC, and there are many energy-dense, emissions-free sources such as nuclear power. Natural gas has very low emissions also. So with that, I'll turn it over to Liliana.
Thank you very much, Diana. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Vice President Robert Zille. Thank you very much, Witold, Robert, in general, New Direction, for organizing conference on such important topic, especially nowadays. And second of all, thank you very much for having me here. Well, I think we can all agree that 24th of February completely redefined the modern world order. And I also believe that we will not go back to the way things were before. Russian aggression on Ukraine has shown that Europe is completely energy dependent. Also, Russian aggression on Ukraine has showed that Europe was not ready to be cut off from raw materials from Russia, especially gas, making the last but also the upcoming winter a huge challenge, not just for political systems, but I think most importantly for citizens, because it is about citizens. Coming here, I was wondering what is really in the interest of Poland, what is in the interest of Latvia, what is in the interest of Central Eastern European countries, in the Three Seas countries, not in the interest of officials in Brussels, and not in the interest of big world powers. And it is in our interest to be energy independent, and I believe that we can say that energy independence and energy security is equal in the case of our region. And I think we can also quite paradoxically say that the war in Ukraine has given us some opportunities. War in Ukraine will accelerate the process of, first of all, energy supplies diversification, but also this energy security and also energy independence. At the moment, Poland is investing in nuclear energy. Last year, we signed a contract with Westinghouse to build our first nuclear power plant, and I hope it will be ready to operate in 2033. Poland is also investing in small nuclear reactors. We're planning to have, this is very impressive, 79 of them in 2038. And I hope that these plans will not be stopped by Brussels. And I also hope that these plans will not be stopped by a potential new government, because as we all know, the elections in Poland are approaching this year, most likely October. Also, Poland's energy mix is quite carbon intensive. Lignite and hard coal account for around 70% of our electricity production. Well, it is influenced by our geological but also historical issues. We have been using our deposit for years. However, our energy mix is also in quite difficult position due to the EU climate policy. We also don't have many possibilities to replace coal with something that will be as stable as coal is at the moment for my country. So until we have nuclear energy, there are several dilemmas, and the question here is, Should we be able to use our own sources? Should we be able to use coal that provide us with some systemic stability, but was made hellishly expensive by the speculative EU ETS system? Or should we create new green gas infrastructure and pour concrete, which I think is not green either? So, to conclude, new energy systems will require countries to work together, and I believe that in this group here, there is an understanding for such cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me here. So, I have the honor to start the newest and to lead the newest ministry in Latvia, which is Ministry for Climate and Energy. And when I started this, my husband was making a joke that it's a very interesting set of topics, as historically climate and energy has been at odds among others, and the agendas were not aligned. But I'm very happy that today we live in a world where climate and energy can help each other, because there is no sustainability without security of supply, and vice versa. When looking at Latvian energy sector, we have set three main objectives that we try to accomplish. Firstly, we want to be energy independent and energy exporting nation. Secondly, we want to use our existing resources as efficiently as possible. And thirdly, we want to rely on market signals and prices. This means that when we set out our policies, we follow these three main topics. Coming back to the first of those, it relates to the energy independence and energy exporting nation. From electricity point of view, the last time we were fully covering our consumption was 2017, which is not actually that long ago. We usually stray between 60 to 70% of our natural consumption, which is 7 terawatt-hours per year, we can cover by our local generation. Rest of that is imported. Before February 2022, we imported part of it from Russia. And I'm very, very proud of Baltic countries that we managed to go from highly reliant on Russian energy products to not using them at all in such short time, both in electricity as well in natural gas. There is no commercial trade between Latvia, Estonia or Lithuania with Russia regarding energy products. So currently, together as all three Baltic countries, we're working on increasing our capacity to generate electricity, and in particularly cheap electricity. That means that we all work towards high renewable intensive energy mix, and that also requires us to be smart and cooperate, and that's something Baltic states have shown being very much capable of. So when looking in future, I see these three nations very much capable of sustaining our own needs and also supporting Europe in general.
Yeah. Thank you, Roberts, and previous speakers. Reins and Ruot already mentioned the most of the important topics, but I'll just stress a little bit more also from the producer side. As you know, if we want to reach these European targets, Repower EU, it's around 100 billion and more investments every year. And we just came from Germany, where we had a meeting of offshore in the Baltic Sea, and in 2022 there was zero feed taken on offshore investment last year. And that is due to the politicians, due to the inflation, and this huge uncertainty which is in the electricity market in general. As you know, then in power generation, these investments are very long-term, 30, 40 years ahead. And that needs quite a lot of stability and predictability to invest this huge money. And Nord Pool is one of the examples, mentioned also by Reinis last year. August super high prices, 4,000, and a lot of politicians got scared and made a lot of intervention into the market. But this is this very important point, not to mix short-term problems with the long-term. And not even 1 year is passed, and we see minus prices. There was even minus hundreds, and that does not support this huge investment or transformation of the European market. It makes it very difficult, and of course how we can get minus prices, there are a lot of questions, and it's not so easy to explain, but one of this is also the subsidized business, and so that means a lot of problems for the feed decisions today. If we talk about the Baltic states, then we are importing 12 terawatt-hours, and I'm mentioning only Baltic states, but basically Nord Pool market is already very well connected. These connections are to be improved very much in the future, so these prices and influences will come all over the Europe, so starting from Norway up to Germany and the Netherlands. And today we see this so-called duck curve of the sun generation with the minus prices starting from 11 to 3 or 4 o'clock during the day, and that mainly comes from the Netherlands and Germany, where a lot of this generation is made. So when we analyze what will be the Nord Pool price in 5-10 years in Latvia, this is so difficult thing, because you have to look at what will happen in Norway, what will happen in Germany, what will happen in Finland. For instance, Finland, for the first time this year, is becoming in May exporting country, 2 terawatt-hours for this year probably exporting. Next year they plan to export already 6 terawatt-hours, and they have around 25 terawatt-hours of renewables to be invested. And as they have completed this nuclear plant and they are at the regular weather, they are self-sufficient today instead of importing previously. So the cheap prices will come from north also to our region, and of course if we want to change our fossil fuels to renewables, let's say 1,000 megawatt-hours is more than 1 billion investment. So it takes a lot of risk. Many banks already have stopped financing, for instance, sun generation projects. And what I wanted to say, in Estonia, politicians came to regulating the price with the universal price, and they were happy only for 2 months, because in January, when Nord Pool dropped, they were in an opposite position when the universal price was higher than the Nord Pool, and so they again had to regulate. And I would say that politicians made a little bit funny themselves, and Lithuanians at this point, when we have these long-term fixed prices which give you some stability, now the Nord Pool price is down, and now they are again trying to regulate, and they want to take away the penalties for cancelling long-term agreements. But again, if you don't have these long-term agreements, this is basically the only security what producer have, and the only support to make some fit decision for investing in renewables. So this kind of short-term looking at this market design is not helping, and Europe has to be aligned in their policy. I would say also the mentioning about the gas, devolizing the gas is not the correct way, because it's much cleaner than coal. And this is basically the best transition power what you can have. It's the cheapest, fastest and cleanest. So the only thing is that you need to think about other routes of this gas, and for instance, closing Germany, the nuclear power plants means that they cannot close the coal generation for a long time, which produces a huge amount of CO2. And also one of of course, nobody knows exactly what is the cause, but April, June, plus 1%, plus 1 degree in the ocean surface. And there are quite scary news about really the heating of the planet and all the causes what can come. Maybe this is El Niño, maybe this is El Niño together with some climate heating. So it's very, very difficult times for investors because a lot of things are very, very uncertain and volatile. So politicians should be very smart to manage this kind of situation. Thank you.
So there's a lot to break down in there, but I think the first question I'd like to address is, bearing in mind this situation in Estonia you described, what do you see as the balance between market versus state intervention or state regulation?
It's always very, you have to be very careful when intervening the market, because you cannot stop sun from shining, even if you want to, or if you are like in a, basically the market anyway has to cover the costs, and somebody has to pay it sooner or later. So every regulation means that somebody else will pay for that, or you will simply not get these renewables, as I said, as a Repower EU probably wants to. So, and I would say that Eurelectrics also has made this similar analysis like Reinis and Ruota did, and basically the short market functioned well, and basically all the interconnections in Nord Pool allowed countries to save the money. Because if there would be only the closed markets, then volatility would be 10 times higher. But the problem is that there is no long-term market today, because there is no possibility to hedge prices for a very long time. PPA market basically is working only with the very strong companies, because there is no any security ensuring in place, etc. And so it's not working in full. And then, of course, there is this competition between the countries, which is also a very difficult question. Like, for instance, Germany can allow, they have till 2030, they will subsidize electricity-intensive companies 60 euros per megawatt. Above is paid by the country. Not every country can afford it. So it's very difficult questions. On one side you have business which is screaming, give me cheap prices because Germany has cheap prices, or Lithuanians have cheap prices, and please fix the price. On the other hand, somebody has to pay it, and then do you have money for renewables and for this big transition which needs a lot of money?
Because how does a government respond to that same question? You know?
Yes, thank you. I absolutely agree to the statement that when we talk about state intervention, it's a very, very careful balancing game. The theory says that we should intervene in the market only when there is market failure. Secondly, we should intervene when naturally there is insufficient balance between market players' negotiation power. So, as I mentioned in our three main pillars for energy policy, trusting the market and price signals is one of them, and that is usually the most controversial one, because that means that sometimes when prices are high, we must allow them to be high, because otherwise we can only fix problems in short term, but we have even larger problems in long term. From Latvian perspective, we have been in team market from European side, both when we discussed possibility on European level to divide market in inframarginals and marginals, which we were against, as well as having major rework of short-term markets. In general, what we see is that short-term markets do work. What we also see that some adjustment period will be necessary. For example, I do not foresee that for years and years we will see negative prices, because that doesn't follow logic. People will learn how to turn off how to turn off and not produce electricity during summer by PVs, for example. There will be automation for that, there will be service for that, and there will be money generated from the service. So that is something that will fix itself. There are certain society groups that should be protected more. And electricity is one of those resources, or the base resource, which is, to extent, something people can't live without. So we have to be mindful of more vulnerable parts of society, specifically from residential segment. Regarding companies, this is something we're also closely following. I'm aware that in Germany, the support for companies with high risk of moving to other regions is receiving quite generous support. Still waiting whether this fully complies with Europe and what will be Brussels' view on this for longer term and for this particular period. Whether that is applicable for Latvia, we probably need to assess. That assessment hasn't been made at the moment. There is multiple situations how we do it. So to summarize, I do agree that balance should be kept, and we should try as a state not to increase the hysteria or euphoria, which we usually tend to go rounds and rounds. We should be the steady, long-term thinking element that helps steady and reduce volatility, not to increase it. And overacting to short-term problems will usually accelerate the issues you already have and aggregate. Thank you.
And part of that building capacity and stability is taking place at a regional level. We've seen projects through the 3 Seas initiative, for example. So perhaps, Liliana, you can give a bit more of a perspective on how the 3 Seas initiative is supporting this development of an energy market in the region.
Yes, sure. Well, 3 Seas initiative is an initiative that was built actually on 3 pillars, and energy security is one of them. Another one is transportation. And the third one is digitalization. So we're always talking about the infrastructure that has been neglected in our region. Most of the transmission lines were built from west to east, making our region completely dependent. So now we are building the infrastructure that will be in this line, so coming from northern countries to southern countries. Well, Poland, actually this year, a Polish company, PKN Orlen, so biggest company, has signed a contract with Sempra Infrastructure. This is American company where we will be receiving more and more LNG since 2027. And because of this kind of projects, then we as Poland, but also other countries, can provide our region with energy security because of our interconnectors that we have with Lithuania, for example, or Slovakia and Czech Republic. With Czech Republic, we have already one interconnector, but we're planning to have another one because this one has not enough capacity. And regarding the vulnerable parts of the societies, I completely agree. This year we published a report on energy poverty within the household sector in Poland in 2021, because it was the latest data possible. You can read from our statistics that around 17 to 20% of the society lives under energy poverty. It means that almost every 5th person in Poland is not able to pay for their houses to be warm in winter, or to pay for electricity bills. So I think this is super important to focus on those who cannot afford to live in a very normal human conditions. And actually, 3 Seas initiative is also focusing on it. Thank you.
And Diana, one of the pillars, as we heard, of the 3 Seas initiative was, of course, energy security. And one of the key areas that I think the Trump administration in America excelled at was this idea of exporting surplus LNG to Europe. Can we expect to see America start to take an interest in European energy again, or has the Biden administration really changed policies?
Well, the Biden administration has changed policies. We are still exporting, But if a Republican administration should win the elections in the fall of 2024, then in 2025 there's going to be more domestic oil and natural gas production, plus quicker approval of pipelines, because the Biden administration isn't just slowing down the permits for oil and natural gas development, it's also slowing down approval of pipelines that makes it harder to get the natural gas out from the center of the country to where it needs to be exported. It's also using different agencies, such as the Securities and Exchange Commission, to look at the climate effects of businesses' investment. That discourages businesses from investing in pipelines and associated components. It's asking the Office of the Controller of the Currency to look at banks and bank loans for climate risks. That discourages banks from lending for this. So they slow down the approval of pipelines, they discourage banks from lending, they discourage companies from investing, and this is even apart from the whole environmental protection agencies regulations that are raising the cost of electricity, raising the cost of transportation, which disproportionately hurts the poor and middle class. So they have, as Liliana said, also electricity and energy poverty and transportation poverty. So these are things that a new Republican administration would roll back.
And I wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned in your opening remarks, and actually Mr. Zila mentioned in his, which is about critical raw materials and about US policy towards that. We've seen a move towards onshoring and towards bringing production up in America. Will we see that in a new Republican administration as well? Will that be a continued policy?
A continued policy to have more domestic oil and natural gas production,
but also in other energy sectors, so for example nuclear or in wind or...
There's a lot of interest in nuclear, and wind in some cases makes sense, in other cases it doesn't. There's tremendous subsidies for wind and solar, and in some ways they can be justified, and in others they can't. So Republican administrations basically believe in an even playing field. The ideal is to have a flat playing field and not subsidize wind and solar more than other forms of energy. We see that every wind farm needs an associated natural gas power plant to be able to operate when the wind stops blowing, and it actually costs more to have the natural gas-fired power plant cycle on and off when the wind stops blowing than to cycle continuously. So there's very high costs, plus connecting the wind and solar to the grid is also very costly. So all these efforts raise the price of electricity and hurt poor people, small businesses, middle-income people, and farmers the most.
Okay, so in effect we can sort of take a warning perhaps from America about the transition and sort of focus instead on natural gas.
Well, we don't really believe in the transition to net zero. We don't think it's ever going to happen, because even if we paper over the whole of the United States with solar panels and wind turbines, one still needs fossil fuels to make the wind turbines and to make the solar panels. So we think that the transition to net zero is mythical, a bit like Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy.
I think Liga wanted to respond on that.
I probably should. I think the positions Europe in general, as well Baltics, are taking perhaps somewhat diverges from what you described. And that probably is related to what natural resources each country has. For example, in Baltics, we are not going to be major natural gas producer. We have untapped potential for biomethane, which we are planning to use, and we hope to use that to support, again, also green transition. In Europe, all countries expect to reach climate neutrality until 2050, and I do agree that that's a very ambitious goal and that takes a lot of effort, but we have to work together and use this also as an opportunity, because again, if we would continue to use fossil fuels as much as we have done that until now, and just stop importing them from Russia or from anybody, we can't sustain ourselves. So we have somewhat different perspectives based on what natural resources we have. In Europe, we have sufficient wind, we have sufficient solar. We see that there is quite good opportunities to manage the grid issues because you can combine solar and wind and get quite good efficiency of grid use as well. You can improve technologies to cheapen the cogeneration plant use, sort of turning it on and off. You are correct that that is more costly and it is more challenging. You can design balancing and reserve market to make sure that these controllable, dispatchable stations can participate on equal, fair remuneration and still use as much as possible sort of carbon neutral technology. So I would say that at least from what I've seen from Brussels or what we have discussed in Baltics, we fare somewhat different route here.
And so what then is the kind of golden ratio that we're looking for in terms of energy mix? Obviously, in the past, we were over-dependent on Russian imported cheap energy. What should we be looking at towards the future?
Yeah, some questions are unclear yet because we can maybe somewhere see them and hope that they will come, like hydrogen and also nuclear, small nuclear plants. Basically, there are a lot of in pipeline, but none of them are built yet. So, and we have to see what will be the LCOE of such technology and sustainability. Of course, it's much easier to do also for the countries who already have in place the nuclear. And of course, if we are willing to at some point get rid of fossil, then you cannot do it without nuclear or hydrogen, that's for sure. The only thing is that the choice, yeah? And I would say that you cannot live without gas, I think, at least until 2040, because, as I said, technology is not there yet. But after 2040, let's see, hopefully some new technologies develop and we see this way how to reduce these CO2 emissions and to go greener.
If I can add on that, climate neutrality doesn't mean that we stop emitting any sort of GHGs. It just means that we account for them and what we need for economy to continue existing, we manage also to capture in either. There is tons of technology there. I absolutely agree that if I think the question I get most often is what is our future energy mix in 2025, 2030, 2040, 2050, any number that is not today. I can very easily answer what is our energy mix today, because that's a fact. For future, I think that if there is something we have learned from the last 2 years, is that we shouldn't take anything for granted, and we have to keep open mind for what technologies offer. Obviously, what we're looking in future is much higher part of renewables. Combined wind, onshore wind and solar, offshore wind. Continuously reducing the emissions of gas, sort of perhaps using gas and dispatchable stations as enabling technology that helps us keep the system in balance. So what I can say about future, that it looks bright, but we have to work towards it and we have to follow technology development as well.
If I may just add one thing, I have the impression that we're, let's call it, swapping from one authoritarian regime to, to another one. So we are becoming energy independent from Russia, but at the same time we're getting dependent on China. And I don't think if that's our goal for the future. Well, in the case of Poland, I wouldn't say that we have enough sun. I would doubt that. When I came here, wow, almost 30 degrees, you know, in Poland, barely 20.
You need a climate ministry, then it's going to be sunny.
In the case of onshore, well, we also have some problems. However, in offshore, we're investing a lot. Actually, we're also planning to have some investments with Latvia to have our systems connected. I mean, it's still a plan, but I think it's a good plan. And as I said in the beginning, we all need to work together to achieve goals. But, you know, we can think about the technologies that we don't have, but right now we're having problems. And if we have a problem now, what should we do? Should we have energy deficits? I don't think so. And in the current moment, we should use what we have. Poland has coal. So what we should do? Like, if we don't have yet the, you know, enough solar power plants, if we don't have enough wind power plants, should we tell people, sorry guys, today you will not have electricity, probably tomorrow as well, and in the upcoming months too. So I think in this current situation, we are forced to use what we have, and Poland has coal. I'm sorry, these are our geological issues, so we will use what we have. We can eat, I don't know, some, I don't think so, like, you know, so coal is the only opportunity we have now.
Well, nuclear, as we've heard, is a very, very promising technology. France has generated 70% of its electricity with nuclear power for many years. It's very safe. There's a lot of new technology coming with nuclear, and this is a dense, emissions-free energy that we should be looking at and putting in place. One of my team members at Heritage is working on rolling back regulations in the United States that discourage nuclear power. We are not advocating any financial subsidies from the government. We are advocating rolling back certain regulations that prevent it. I also want to bring up what we call reverse supply chain problems with wind, solar, and electric. How are we going to dispose of all the electric batteries from the cars when they are used up? How are we going to dispose of the old wind turbines, the old solar panels? These are problems we have not focused on. Also, we have environmental problems from mining the minerals that have to go into the electric batteries. This causes vast amounts of environmental degradation, which we have moved to places such as Africa and Latin America because we don't see them. But we wouldn't have this mining in the United States. It's not allowed, even though companies want to do it. We don't have it in Europe. It's something that we are moving to emerging economies, and we need to take a serious look as to whether this is something that we want to do when we could be using clean natural gas, clean nuclear power, and clean coal.
And it's interesting that you talk about the sort of reverse supply chain issues, but also, again, in Mr. Ziele's presentation, he talked about the balance of foreign material, critical raw material required for the production of electric cars and for the production of batteries and so on. So how can we perhaps become better at producing those things ourselves? Or what's the future prospect of developing a technology that suits us better without, as Liliana explained, becoming dependent on another authoritarian regime?
Right now, and I don't see this changing, we are dependent on China for the batteries and for the minerals that go into the batteries. And I personally am not an advocate of electric vehicles. If we want to move to another fuel, we should use hydrogen-powered vehicles, which are a lot more similar to the internal combustion engine. We've had in cities a lot of clean natural gas buses going around. There's no reason to make these electric. They have very heavy batteries. They cost 1.5 times as much as another bus. And we need more of them because they have to be recharged. So I think the fundamental idea of relying on electric vehicles does not fit with our environmental goals of reducing waste, reducing mining of minerals. Plus, these electric batteries are charged using fossil fuels. So instead of using the gasoline to power the vehicle, we are using coal, natural gas to power the electricity that then recharges the vehicle. This is costly and inconvenient. We have to distinguish between average emissions, which include wind and solar, and then the marginal emissions, which happen after we have used all our renewables, and we are then adding electric vehicles to the grid, charging them, and these are charged with coal and with natural gas. And it doesn't make any sense. We might as well just use the gasoline to power the vehicles.
If I would just add maybe two things to the issue with electric vehicles, especially in Poland. Well, as I already mentioned, our energy mix is quite carbon intensive. So if we look at the whole European Union, Poland and Kosovo are, I think, the only places, I mean, it was the research I did was, let's say, 2 years ago, are the countries where electric vehicles are much worse than normal cars with normal engines, let's say, because of our energy mix. So right now in Poland, it's not so eco to have an electric car. Another thing is that average age of car in Poland is around 16 years. 16. So imagine a situation that a politician will tell a person on the street that they should, leave their 16 years old diesel and buy 50,000 euro car. It's not possible to do in this kind of environment. Another question is, there are still places in Poland that are I think it's called transportation exclusion. Yeah, I mean there are places still without, for example, public transportation. So if you don't have a car, you're 16 years old, diesel, you will not be able to get to a church, you will not be able to get to a hospital or grocery shop. So you cannot do it. In 2035, producers will be forced to stop producing cars with normal engines. And I believe that from this time, the demand for, normal cars, I mean the engine cars, will go up because people will not able to buy electric cars. So I think this idea about electric vehicles will cause more problems, more damage for the societies than any advantages. I mean, I'm talking from this current moment when I'm looking at the environment we have in Poland. So you cannot tell people to leave their 16 years old cars and to buy very expensive electric cars. It's not possible. And what about the recycling of batteries? There are so many, issues with the electric cars. And I'm talking about Polish environment and our current energy mix. It's not advantageous.
Well, in general, most of the cars sold in the United States, it's about 72% are used vehicles. It's very difficult to buy a used electric vehicle because you don't know what situation the battery will be. And if the battery goes, that's an expensive 12 to 15,000 euros to buy a new battery for the car. So there isn't a good market for used electric vehicles. And most people buy used vehicles rather than new vehicles. So that's another problem in the supply chain.
Yeah, if I can add on that, I think that what we have seen here, that it's very important to, when we look at changes and when we look at policy, we have to try to stay away from looking at things as a black and white. You're absolutely correct. When we look at batteries and electric vehicles and renewables, we have taken into account the reverse supply chain. And you are correct that many minerals that we use is quite tricky to come by. And we do, again, we have potential to make the same mistakes we have made previously with relying on single supplier for one or another element that is necessary in our critical security of supply aspect. At the same time, just to give again a bit of data, Poland is not the number 1 or number 2 in the oldest cars. That honor goes to Lithuania and Latvia. Latvia is number 2. The first one is Lithuania. In Latvia, the average age of the car is 17.5 years. Similarly to Lithuania, Latvia and Poland, we receive quite a lot of secondary market cars from Germany. And when we look at diesel, which is probably the least climate-friendly vehicle fuel, I am happy to let you know that at least in Q4 2022, 66% of the new registered cars were benzene, and then the next largest group, approximately 25%, was diesel. When we look at moving towards more climate-friendly economy, I don't think we should look at black and white, and you're correct. If I would go to a rural area or even in sort of suburb in Riga and say, I think that your diesel needs to be changed to electric car, I could at best leave unharmed.
You will receive, I think, some eggs or tomatoes to your face, I believe.
But there is quite a lot of difference between 2-liter atmospheric or sort of old big diesel without a filter and economic benzene car. So it is a degrees. It's not black and white. You can make short, possible and sort of reasonable steps toward more climate-friendly economy. And you have to take, as I mentioned at the beginning, as a policy maker, we also have to take into account more vulnerable parts of society, and we shouldn't be unreasonable and request things that are not possible. If average car park age is 17.5 years, then by 2030 we are not going to have electrical cars for all society, because that's not how reality works. But we can do more to be in a better place than we are now, because without doing anything, nothing changes.
Taking a step back up to the sort of broader security issue, I mean, as we've discussed, there's the raw materials issue, there's the where does it come from, and the same applies to energy itself. I mean, one of the points that you've all brought up is that we'll never be truly self-sufficient on our own, and that we will still have to depend on foreign partners. So we can't use Russia, for obvious reasons. China is equally a threat. The USA, depending on the administration. Who then should our partners be?
No pressure.
For us, I think it's more question really for these politicians to decide to the right or to the left. And for instance, you cannot make long-term investments in terminals and secure LNG supply with constantly increasing CO2 emission prices, because at the end I cannot produce cheap electricity by gas simply because of CO2 prices, and that means that there will be no normal investment decisions again in these terminals, or some of them will be wasted investments, etc. So some balance should be done there, and as correctly said, then any extreme is not correct at the end. And at the end, as I said before, then some decisions lead to not slightly bigger, but drastically bigger CO2 emissions at the end. So greenwashing is the problem, I think, today, and of course there is different economics behind why it is happening. So I would vote for balancing, and we talked in Germany about this. One of the parts is offshore business, and then producers of the wind turbines. We have 2 European companies which are making losses last year, quite huge, 1.5 billion and 0.6 billion for another. And what they said is that they can change the supply chain from China to Australia and other parts of the world. But then they say that sustainable, green and safe, it's not cheap. So you cannot expect very cheap green energy in Europe, which would suit all of the business and population, and at the same time have all the other security things correct. So there is certain price to be paid. It can be done, but again, politicians should decide right or left, straight or back, or...
Not a politician, but sort of, I think this is not a mystery. You're absolutely correct. We shouldn't switch one single point of failure for a different single point of failure. Financial markets has taught us this already. What we need to do, we need to diversify, and we need to try to rely on, we need to try to have redundancy, and we need to have the alternatives where possible, and we have to be able to identify where we have these single points of failure. That being said, Latvia is a very small country. We are not afraid to be dependent on foreign partners and to have good relationships with foreign partners, because otherwise we wouldn't have good life we would like to have. We can't be best in everything. We can be best in something and then import where we are not best, where we don't have the natural advantage. So I wouldn't say that we have to be we have to choose this one good partner that will be good forever, because things change. What we should do is we have to be mindful where the points of failure are and diversify as much as possible, and that should bring us the best result.
Well, what was black is now green. The EU declared that nuclear and natural gas are now clean fuels, and there are some countries that have natural gas that could be using it more. Just to take Hungary as an example, they have natural gas, but they have about 100% windfall profit tax on extracting it. So they could be making a lot more use of their clean natural gas than they are now. I mean, they have a tax regime that has a top corporate tax rate of 9%, but for some reason, the royalty tax and windfall profit tax on their natural gas is just sky high, and the royalties go up even as the price goes down, making it very difficult for companies to profitably extract this. And I'm just giving one example. I'm sure there are many others. But natural gas, nuclear power, these are possibilities. They are clean, and they keep the price of electricity relatively low. And when there are high prices of electricity, people are more likely to try to do without it. There can be deaths from cold. There are more deaths from cold than from heat. We also need to look at adaptation, geoengineering. We've seen from the recent wildfires in Canada that cloud cover or particulates can result in a degree of cooling. There's research on cloud seeding, on painting roofs white, on other kinds of measures that would reduce global temperatures that we need to be doing research into also.
Well, actually, I believe that as a European Union, we can be energy independent solely on our sources, and it could be renewables for sure, cooperation between countries like the offshore. I think that's a really good idea, but I think still we need something that would be stable. So far we don't have the technology that will store it on such level that we need. So I think nuclear would be our new component of energy mix that will be stable, and it will enable us, you know, even if there's no sun or no wind, especially sun, in Poland. And regarding the partners, I believe that we should have for now as many partners as possible, because history showed us that one partner is not the best idea to have. However, actually Poland had a very clear view on Russia since centuries. As you know, 3 partitions, then the 4th one. Also our late president, and let me quote his words, in 2008 he visited Georgia, Lech Kaczyński, during the Russian-Georgian war, just after another Russian bombing of the city Georgia. And he said that right now there's Georgia, tomorrow there will be Ukraine, then Baltic states, and who knows, maybe Poland. So Polish-Russian relations are marked by bloody wars and tragedy that Russia did on our society. So we always were warning Western European countries that, well, maybe, partners, fine, but we should diversify our energy sources earlier. So I don't want to blame Germany for what is happening, but I completely don't understand why on 15th of April this year they closed their last nuclear power plants. I believe it was a huge mistake, and I hope that we as Poland and other countries that are having their nuclear power plants will be able to continue development in this sector.
So we'll open the floor to questions now. I think there's a microphone somewhere. Are there any questions from the... Okay, we'll go with Alan.
What I wanted to start by saying is that one of the dangers, I think, with a lot of this is that we have to leave ideology to some degree behind and look at some of the practicalities of this. I wouldn't take such a hostile view of electric vehicles. One could argue it's a first generation. If you'd actually seen, for example, the Model T at the beginning, you sit there and think, this thing isn't going to work. It's a Model T, it's very difficult. The early internal combustion engines were very inefficient. You can see potentially how it could contribute, and you can see how actually if you can have electric vehicles working and functioning with lighter batteries, you massively improve the quality of air in the cities, which is great for human health and so forth. You can see how nuclear can play a very significant role. My view about with a lot of renewables is the fact that the key element there is large-scale battery storage. There's technological developments. If we can have large-scale battery storage, you don't need all the complexities of running the power networks. You don't need all of the complex grid network. So the thing is that we're in a state where I feel there's a danger we have to put our ideologies aside and look at the direction and what we can do. And I think I do accept entirely the point about the danger of recreating the same problems as we had before in terms of relying, say, on solar panels from China or wind. We have to create our own supply chains. There's a whole series of factors, but one of the issues which I think is, apart from the putting aside of ideology, is this sense that we have to recognize our supply security threat from other ways. I mean, I'll give you another example which I think is really important, is hydrogen. There's a lot of German government interest in hydrogen. We can have an argument about whether hydrogen, how effective it is, but a lot of it seems to be at the moment about bringing in hydrogen from other parts of the world. And again, you're asking, is Germany recreating or wanting to recreate the same supply security problems as we had with Russia? So my issue is can we possibly put ideology aside, look at the practicalities, look at the direction of travel, and try and take account of the supply security risks we've already experienced and the lessons from that in order to develop an energy security strategy which can work and keep us safe and keep us with hopefully lower energy prices. So that's quite a lot, but I think that's where I'm kind of going with all of this. That's my comment.
Who wants to unpack that?
Oh, well, I'm sure all of us would, but perhaps I could start by saying that this isn't ideology on my part. With the Model T, no one had to force people to buy them. With smartphones, mobile phones, no one had to force people to buy them. With air conditioning, no one had to force people to buy it. Right now, 6% of vehicles sold in the United States are electric. The Environmental Protection Agency has a rule that would get this to 60, 10 times as much by 2030. They are paying companies to produce these vehicles by subsidizing their EV plants and their battery plants. They are paying people to buy them, giving them a subsidy of $7,500 per vehicle. And many people love their electric vehicles. I have no objection to people choosing electric vehicles if they want to buy them. But I do object to the government making me, as a taxpayer, pay for people to have them. I object to being forced to purchase an electric vehicle. I object to these companies falling in line with the government and saying that from 2035 they are not going to make internal combustion engine cars. I think it's a major mistake. These are more expensive, they're inconvenient, they make you rely on government charging stations. And this isn't ideology. I believe in personal choice. I'm pro-choice. People who want to buy an EV should be able to, people who want to buy an internal combustion engine should be able to, and they shouldn't take away my choice of an internal combustion engine and force me to buy something more expensive that I would buy otherwise. So it's not ideology on my part.
Yeah, I would just add, it's not ideology as well, it's just data and science. It's enough if you just look at statistics, plus we're talking about the vulnerability people and the poorer parts of the societies. Well, if you're subsidizing, even if you're subsidizing electric cars, still richer parts of the societies will be able to buy them. Even if you subsidize electric vehicle for poorer parts of the societies, they will not be able, and they are not even thinking about buying electric vehicle because they are thinking how to feed their children, how to get their children to school. These are the problems that people are really facing. Sometimes I'm thinking that we are really creating problems there where there are no problems, actually. Plus, I really hate the hypocrisy that we have right now in the European Union. You know, okay, fine. If you want to have electric car, you can have electric cars. But why the European commissioners at the same time, and this is public data, you can check it on the webpage of the European Commission, why at the same time they are increasing their spending on private jets flights? Tell me. Why they cannot change to, I don't know, trains or some other ways of transportation? Okay, you know, I can sacrifice. Okay, if it's the idea, I will not eat meat, okay, I will use my feet, I will use public transportation, I am using public transportation, but why at the same time they are increasing their spendings on private jet flights? I don't understand it.
I would probably like to tap on sort of other aspect of what was mentioned. I do believe that especially when we speak about climate change, and I have had lots of experience even in this short period of time, it's very easy to fall in pitfalls of ideology. And I think that when we look at long-term strategy, long-term ways, we should focus on being pragmatic and look at, again, things we can do and that make sense, and perhaps try to distance ourselves as much as possible from ideological, either one or other side. Just try to keep it together with the science. So that would be my hope.
Yeah, every transition costs, and of course also transition to zero-emission technologies has a price. But this technology is very fastly developing, and of course a lot of incentives help them to invest even more in research development. The recycling park, I think, is in a scope now for every company, how to recycle the renewables technologies, and I think we will have these solutions very soon. And therefore, I think that for Baltic states, for Europe, for many countries, buying some technology and being then 30 years independent, I think is the correct way to think, because this gives you stability, independence, and possibility to make your economics planned for 30 years ahead. So I'm looking forward these technologies to be also cost efficient in the future, and to meet all these three targets which we have in the electricity production. It should be for a good price for the people, because otherwise it's not sustainable. It should be safe and profitable also for the producers. So I think we find this balance, and that Europe goes independent and also greener, because we don't know the cause exactly, but climate heating is a fact. It's not anymore the question.
Any other questions?
My name is Bjorn Peters. I'm from this country cursed by a green government right now, from Germany. One remark, I think we really need to ally and lobby towards the EC in order to get rid of the Renewable Energy Directive and this car directive. The future that is very much overlooked is coming from nuclear energy, and quite a number of vendors are in the verge of developing high temperature nuclear energy. And with high temperature above 900 degrees, you can very efficiently produce fuels from chemical processes, not via electrolysis, but via thermolysis. It's very efficient, very cheap, and this will be the future. As soon as these are out there, a huge world market will evolve around syn fuels that are not produced by so this electric component. So directly cheaper than today's refinery products, and it will probably be ammonia, not something carbon-based. So the industry will be able to solve this, but what we are going to need is political support. And we all want to live in a healthy environment, but that has exactly three components. We need to have surface concentrated technologies that don't consume too much land. We need closed cycles, so to recycle everything, so not mine too much, and it has to be cost efficient. We all have seen the pictures of New York Madison Square, Easter Monday, 1900. Lots of horse carriages, one car, and 13 years later, same place, same day in the year, all over cars and one horse carriage. And this was not done because of government subsidies, but because the better solutions were there. And that is exactly what nuclear energy can do. And we just don't see it yet because we are too lazy to look it up and what is happening in the laboratories and in the actually being produced and being well financed in lots of companies and startup companies that are out there.
It's not just laziness. You know, the World Bank is not allowed to lend for nuclear power in Africa and Latin America, and we haven't talked at all about emerging economies and their energy needs. You know, if you got rid of all fossil fuels in the United States, it would only make a difference of about 1/5 of 1 degree Celsius by 2100, because other areas are using more energy and need to get up to Western standards of living. So it's really a tragedy that the World Bank will not lend for this clean energy in Africa and Latin America, where people are burning wood and dung for fuel with great health costs, and they don't have running water or electricity.
Well, I agree with you, sir. That's why I think Poland is investing in nuclear energy. And I believe that this is the future stable part of our energy mix.
My background is in energy, so naturally I'm also a personal fan of nuclear energy. But we have to also sort of, again, just look at the facts. I think that I read a report from April on SMRs, where we look at small, medium-sized modular reactors. And there is 4 main directions where we go. What you mentioned, absolutely correct. There are some that can help for certain industries. For example, the high temperature ones are good for steel industry, decarbonization. Some others are good for energy, for off-grid solutions as well. They are still quite expensive. If we look at levelized cost of energy, they are outperformed heavily by renewables. So it will be, accessibility of financing will be a very huge issue. I imagine that more than regulation from Europe, our energy future is dependent on what can be financed and where credits can be gotten. So yeah, there is a bit more to it. But currently, I think one of the main issues regarding nuclear is really that it is very, very expensive, specifically if we look at SMRs. Hopefully.
But, you know, if European Commission has money to research the gas that are produced by cows, I believe that we also have money to invest in nuclear power plants.
Final comment?
I just can say that the future is in energy mix, and that's my answer. And there will be no domination of any of the energy production ways in the future. So everybody should use their benefits of the area where you are, because uranium has a problem of also you have to import it somewhere, and you have the disposal issue also, and not every country is very suited for that. So it's a lot of questions, but definitely this is the energy mix, and many technologies are yet to come. So let's keep open eyes.
And on that sort of more optimistic note, we'll thank the panel for their contributions.
I do have a good news for you, because now we will have lunch. But before that, I would like just to remind you, if you could please sign the guest list. If you're enjoying that event, thanks to your signature, we'll be able to have another one next year. So please don't forget to do that. And we will meet each other at 1:30 sharp for the second panel. Thank you. So welcome back to everyone. Welcome back also to our guests on following us on the live stream. I hope you enjoyed lunch. Now we will move to the second and last panel, and this panel will focus a bit more on the market issue, even though I think that market was already quite a lot mentioned in the first panel, but as Mr. Zille mentioned, beginning is normal. Markets and security of supply go all together. Reinis, I would like to welcome you on the stage to moderate the second panel. The floor is yours.
Right, all right, everybody can hear me now. So, well, I not plug this in. No, it's actually it's getting more and more exciting at this conference, and I'm actually happy about that. There's a bit of not exactly a dichotomy, but at least a diversity of opinions and points of view on where the energy system is actually heading in the future, and I like that. Actually, there's nothing more boring than one single opinion, one single correct opinion. So I absolutely welcome the diversity of views here that I heard during the first panel. At some point, I started feeling like it's getting it's getting dangerous, so I actually introduced the helmet here. So, but let me assure you, I actually do walk. I ride the bicycle, and today I chose the bicycle. I also do use public transportation, both petrol, gas, well, not both, but petrol, gas, and electricity. I also occasionally drive, well, internal combustion car, turbocharged. Small liter, but therefore it's very efficient because it's turbocharged. So yeah, I mean, I do all things, and so therefore I'm quite open actually to different solutions, but I still, from the research that I've read over the last 10 years systematically on Science Direct or Scopus, the research actually shows that there is no silver bullet. Or perhaps there is a bunch of silver bullets or a collection of different sorts of bullets which would probably be representing the future solutions to the functioning of the energy system. There'll be a mixture of everything. It's not only nuclear or not only natural gas or not only coal or not only renewables. There will be a combination of things. And the research and R&D, which is based on market principles and on the investment that the market participants are ready to do regarding the choice of energy technologies and energy resources, it demonstrates quite clearly that the hybrid energy systems is the future. It's not only one thing or the other thing or the third thing. Okay, so let's keep our minds open, and despite the fact that we might be more in favor of particular solutions, let's be open to other solutions as well. I do not exactly enjoy building my own future on the bones of somebody else. I think it's good to be considerate of different approaches, different solutions. But I have the absolute pleasure of having the opportunity today to moderate a panel on well, on the functioning of the markets and the dynamics of markets, both regionally and, I can take off the helmet now, regionally and, thank you. Yeah, you can put it on actually to be sure that nobody hits you from behind. So basically, it's about not only exclusively about the functioning of the energy markets, it's also about what do we do to protect those who need protection. So it's broader than that. Although one can say energy markets is about everything. It's about the need to produce energy, it's about delivering the energy to the consumer, it's about consuming, and it's about consuming efficiently, so it covers a broad spectrum of things, the demand side, the supply side, and supply side also includes the transmission and distribution and everything, so there's everything in there. So I'm happy, I was really happy to hear that some of the aspects already were touched in the first panel, but let me explain in a few words how this second panel will function. We have three speakers who have short presentations to show on the screen. So therefore, I'll invite them one by one to come up here on the stage and do the introductory remarks here from here while showing the things they want to show on the screen so that everybody can see, especially those sitting in the front. And after that, I'll invite, there will be 3 people like that, and after that I'll invite everybody here on the stage, and the 2 participants of the panel who hadn't spoken yet by that time will do their introductory remarks while we are sitting here, and we'll kick off the debate, the discussion from there then. So yes, and it's my pleasure to invite as the first speaker, presenter, to invite for the initial intervention Jānis Eisaks from Connexus, which is the gas transmission and storage system operator here in Latvia. Jānis, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, initial presentations of my company is already given. So, TSO, Transmission System and Storage Operator in Latvia. Let me shortly introduce about our company. So, we are partially state-owned company. Majority of the shares is owned by the electricity TSO AST, or Augstsprieguma tīkli. And the other major investor is Marubeni Foundation, which acquired shares of Connexus some time ago. So we operate a storage of approximately 2.4 BCM or 24 terawatt-hours of gas, which can be stored or in the seasonal storage. We operate also approximately 1,200 kilometers of the transmission pipelines, and I'm proud to say that we are, since 2019, we are in the center of the regional integration and regional coordination in regards to the gas transmission storage and serving the market to enable them to deliver. We already, for the 4th year, we are talking about the wider Baltics, meaning that the Baltic market includes also Finland. Since 2020, we are also interconnected, so all the system, all the market is functioning in a great extent like a one. If we look back to the year 22, I would say that our efforts to integrate the markets and better coordinate show that we can do even better. And since February, actually, all the TSOs work together in order to coordinate available capacities to get known where some capacities or where some resources can be delivered for the market. And hopefully also since May 22, the Lithuanian-Polish interconnector also came online. From the very beginning, it was half commissioned. So it was able to deliver gas towards Baltics at the full capacity, but only with a limited capacity back to Poland. So about the gas consumption projections in the mid and longer term. So after the dip of the consumption back in 2022, mainly caused by sharp increase of the gas prices and which actually limited the consumption everywhere in Baltics, with Finland being the country with the greatest fall in consumption, around 50%. Latvia did approximately -30 in that regard. What we see currently, we see the gas consumption to getting back to increasing again, slowly, but still. So our mid or longer term forecast is that gas consumption, at least in Latvia, will approximately restore to the previous level of, let's say, around 11-12 terawatt hours. And over the longer period, we expect that demand for gas and, let's say, for heating, for electricity generation in a small scale installations may go down, but taking into account the desynchronization which should take place in 2025, we expect that gas consumption could increase because of requirements to enable the generation to stabilize the system. Speaking about the very short-term forecast about how the gas storage will function for the next storage cycle, next winter. So our expectations is that it will be filled better than in the previous year. There are two projections, conservative and optimistic. The optimistic shows that it could be close to 80% at the end of injection season. And one of the main characteristics currently set by the regulations regarding the filling rate, we will fulfill the filling rate set by the regulation with a guarantee. Regarding the capacities available in the region, considering the Inko terminal and Klaipėda terminal in combination also with Gipel, we are currently seeing that taking into account the current market situation, the capacities are more than enough to supply the wider Baltic market with the gas. And actually, with a slight excess of capacities. What I can add also as a representative of storage operator, storage users of the storage are coming not just from this wider Baltic. We are actually serving also the customers even from Norway and from Switzerland. So the customer base is quite wide. Not all of them are active, and existing agreements do not require for them to be active in the storage, but they are actually following everything, all the developments and potential changes in some TPA rules we are considering. So, speaking about the longer-term view, how we see the role of gas in the region, in Latvia or the wider region. As we are going towards the deployment of the renewable energy sources in a wider scale, be it wind or be it solar, it anyway will require some to compensate the time when there is no renewable generation with some other source of energy. Here on the slide you see on the left, it's a power generation and demand situation in Denmark back in 22. The green is a green generation, as you may see, but the blue one is a demand for electricity. On the right, it's the same graph for Latvia, taken from an NSOE webpage. In the yellow is shown the generation based on gas, and the demand is the gray area. As you see, not everything can be covered with the imports, or not everything can be covered with already existing our resources. And we see the strength of Inčukalns here as a source of energy which can be supplied almost instantly in amounts which are required for example, our generator TETS2 to work at full capacity. What perspectives we are, as a TSO, we are seeing or we are involved in? So the short-term objective is deployment of the biomethane. In our case, it's a connections to the grid of biomethane producers, or providing the possibility to inject biomethane in the transmission or distribution grid, delivering it by the public roads using specific vehicles. On the map on the right actually shows the white green points. These are existing biogas producers, but the brown and then the different colors are actually picturing the available resources which could be used for production of additional biomethane. And it very well coincides also with the location of our transmission system pipelines. So it means that the existing system can be used for a much longer time, accommodating the national production of biomethane, of energy. In the longer term, we are involved also in the European Hydrogen Backbone project, and we are developing the so-called Northern Baltic Hydrogen Corridor together with the other 6 TSOs. From Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Germany. This week, I believe today, this project is presented to the European Commission in the for the inclusion in the PCI list. So soon we will hear about the results of it. So that's in short. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, my mic is on now. Thank you, Jānis, for your presentation. And now, without further ado, I invite Björn actually to do his presentation. Since not all of us actually do have presentations. Samuel doesn't have one. No. So you're welcome. Your presentation shall be next as you push the green button. Well, it's green anyway, so yeah, the button is green.
And then the next one? Okay.
There you go.
I will be speaking very briefly about the global renaissance of nuclear energy. I used to be an energy market analyst and investor with a German bank. 2 years ago, we founded a company, Dual Fluid Energy, in Vancouver, and I happen to be the chief financial officer. But last year, I published a paper fueled by observations I made in the market, and with a little bit of McKinsey background and investment background. When you calculate 2 and 2 together, you find inevitably that the renaissance of nuclear energy is there, and it will happen in the next couple of years. But first of all, the world needs cheap and abundant energy, and if you take it back from medieval times, we had weather-dependent energy forms, and we knew oils in the Arabic area, but we didn't have the technology to exploit it. In the 18th, so in the industrialization era, we optimized the use of coal and gas and oil, and we had 10 times more energy available than previously in the medieval times. And this led to a modern lifestyle with the double life expectancy. And now what's the next thing? The next big thing is the optimized use of the nuclear energy, which has been invented last century. I can best speak about my own company. With the Dual Fluid offers 100 times more energy available than with fossil fuels. And so this could boost another super cycle of human development. And this in contrast to where we are feared to getting back when we rely too much on weather-dependent energy sources. It used to be a precarious life with short life expectancy, and we should never forget about this, and should probably be grateful to fossil fuels. So now what would make a disruption in the energy market? This is when we could meet the price points of fossil fuels. And fossil fuels, it's about 5 cents per irrespective of whether it's euro or US cents per kilowatt hour in power production for a new built power plant. It's about 2 cents for heating energy, even for industrial heating. And it's an oil equivalent, it's about 30 cents per liter. And the question is, can nuclear energy actually supply energy cheaper than this? And this is referring to the Silicon Valley definition of a disruptive technology. It's something that does the same thing twice as good for half the price. And then it will be a market. It will create its own market without too much government intervention. So just a very short word about what dual fluid is about. Dual fluid means two fluids, obviously, and we use liquid metallic uranium at about 1100 degrees and liquid lead as a coolant. It has very good neutronic properties to control and make the fission reaction stable. And this design has the highest energy density of all nuclear reactors. This leads to the highest temperature, which is extremely useful when you want to produce synfuels, for example. I mentioned it in the morning. And you can reduce the price because you have very few components. The only thing that is actually moving is the liquids. We can afford relatively expensive, high-performance ceramic materials that support the corrosion issues that might emerge between if we had to use steel alloys. And this leads to the lowest possible price of nuclear reaction. So what does it mean if we create a technology, and we are certainly not the only startup in the world who pursues a very strict design to cost in order to make the new generation of nuclear reactors cheaper, better, easier to handle. So what does it mean? Nowadays we consume around 27,000 terawatt hours in power, in electricity globally, but we want to electrify further areas. That's the typical assumption is that electricity consumption has to double. But what people often tend to forget in their predictions, IEA and McKinsey and a few other organizations, that the developing world wants to catch up to our lifestyle. I know it from the Rwandan president. Rwanda has to increase their electricity consumption by a factor of 20 by the mid-30s. That's the plan. So they're very clear in their mind that they have to, if they want to catch up their economies, solve their health, education issues whatsoever, they have to use more power, and much more power, substantially more power than nowadays. And if you assume there's an economic convergence between the developing world and the Western world, this counts for about 60,000 terawatt hours. And the population growth that we expect by mid-century, that's to the earlier parts of the second half of the century, it's another 28,000 terawatt hours. So in total, this is of course a rough estimate, but so it has to quintuple or more in order to make the planet a livable place to be for all the people. And this is the phases of the global renaissance. So what we're seeing now is an extremely high level of innovation in the nuclear sector, the highest since the 1950s, where essentially every system design was tried out, but not necessarily moved to economic maturity. This is different. There are about 90 startups worldwide that develop new reactor models. In parts it is relatively old technology, so pressurized water reactors or boiling water reactors, but made newly in a different angle, introducing industrial manufacturing processes to its production, and that alone will cut costs dramatically. I think that the funding is quite well available for these startup companies. It's private money flowing in mostly, but the DOE, the Department of Energy in the US, is financing a lot of it. And most of them will have their first of a kind FOAK reactor operating around 2030. So that will be the annus mirabilis of the nuclear sector. And what comes out of it in the 1930s, they will after the production of the first reactor, they will go to series production, and by mid-30s, many companies will have up their series production up and running. That creates a few challenges to sell hundreds of reactors in a year, because that's the output capacity of the industry, but they will find their markets. And all of those focus on design to cost, design to simplicity, high repeatability, so total cost of ownership goes down, and non-electric applications will be more and more important. Some of them are operating traditional power plants, but the high temperature designs, there are a few out of them, they will be able to tap into totally new markets that are not served nowadays by reactors. The 2040s will see the scaling of this industry, so the products will be there, people will be used to it, and there will certainly be new business models around it. By the way, a very encouraging sign, I recently met a gentleman, an American gentleman living in Vienna and developing the concept of an international bank for nuclear infrastructure, copied from the model of the World Bank, but just with nuclear compliant countries. He wants to collect $50 billion in equity capital as a starting capital, and then they could finance many of those productions, reach out loans to such models. So all of this will develop or are in the pipeline already. And in the 2050s, the latest, we will have the full value chain evolved. We will be able, the nuclear industry will be able to push out oil and gas, so the fossil fuels, maybe not coal right away, but based on better prices out of the world market. So I think I'm not afraid of climate change, because I know this will happen, and we will be able to overcome fossil fuels much sooner than people believe, and much sooner than is possible with a strategy that relies on weather-dependent sources of energy. And only then we will see, by the way, a consolidation. So maybe not all of those 90 startups will survive, but only 10 of them or whatever. That's what we see nowadays as well. So there's 3-4 major suppliers of coal power plants, but nobody cares. So the market is functioning properly. Yep.
Right. Thank you, Bjorn. And let's have the third speaker, Gatis Junkāns from the Latvia's transmission system operator. I have already a number of questions here for the discussion, but let's wait for the others to have the initial.
Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, I represent Latvian transmission system operator, and our core function is to make sure that lights are on and homes are heated. But a little bit of history. More than 20 years ago, I started my work at that time in vertically integrated Latvian utility, Latvenergo. And I was involved in wholesale of electricity. And I recall that at that time there were no interconnections to European markets. We were entirely integrated in the Russia unified power system. And I recall how the price setting of electricity coming from Russia was at that time. So some of us every year, every December, went to Moscow, or somebody from Moscow came to Riga, and there was simply announcement of price for coming year. And we simply signed the agreement. And there was price for import, because we as a system was deficit, and we also imported all the gas from Russia. And periodically we had a surplus in spring flood time, and then we sold energy to Russia back, and it was almost free of charge, very cheap price. So that was the market setup that I recall when I started my work in energy. Later on, in 2007, we launched first interconnection from Baltics to Finland. And it was a relatively small capacity. It was roughly 10% of Baltic demand, but still it introduced a practical alternative, and it changed the thinking. And after that, there were another projects coming in, and today there are 4 interconnections, and more intentions are there to build even more. And on a slide on the right side, you can see energy exchange. This graph starts at 2013, but if it started, say, from 2000, it would be red. Now the red represents exchange with Russia, and the black represents commercial exchange with European markets. And yeah, last year was a very severe lesson for the Baltic region, but due to the fact that the Baltic transmission system operators started to develop interconnections with European markets already many years ago, we have had alternative already last year. Therefore, last year in May, you can see that this red part exchange with Russia was dropped to 0. Shortly after, there were political decisions about sanctions made, and it did not cause any practical problem to replace it with deliveries from European markets. Also on a left side on a graph, then you see the electricity price. Markets responded adequately. The prices reflected all the scarcity and risks, but mainly the price hike was not due to the problems in power supply, but price hike was due to the gas system, because there was not such a pace of introducing connections and alternative sources in gas. Since in Baltics, gas power plants still represent a marginal supply source, this affected the price. And in a way, this Baltic price picture represents also a situation in whole Europe, where similar effect took place. As a transmission system operator, we have our role to play in securing supply, and we focus on 3 areas. First is we are planning to disconnect from critical dependencies. Therefore, we are in a process to implement the so-called synchronization project. And in 2025, we plan to disconnect all 10 high voltage lines with Russia and Belarus. Second thing is we focus on development of interconnections and a well-functioning market. And in the slide, you can see that there are some interconnections already in place between Baltics and European markets. And there are also several initiatives, intentions in Baltic Sea, also between Lithuania and Poland. Also another S-Link 3 cable between Estonia and Finland. All in all, the intentions of additional interconnections if they materialize, or when they materialize, they would more than double the current interconnection capacity between the Baltics and the European market. And the third our focus area from electricity grid operators is increasing flexibility of power system. And here the main tool is adapting electricity market model so that it remunerates any flexibility in the system. So it is to increase the resilience of the transmission grid, we need more flexibility. And the current market setup does not incentivize emergence of flexibility sources. Any type of technology, be it storage, be it flexible generation, be it demand response. Therefore, we, in the coming 2 years, together with neighboring and European TSOs, we have plans to introduce changes in the market model where these balancing resources will play more active role. There will be higher resolution trading, there will be more frequent electricity auctions closer to real-time delivery. There will be new balancing markets, balancing capacity markets introduced in the Baltic region, and so on. Here I will stop. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gatis. Somehow you got the applause, but anyway, I think the whole of the panel will get the applause by the time we end our discussion. But this is a moment really when I shall invite all the speakers of the panel to take their seats here. They are actually assigned for a small but just price. So let me invite all of the speakers. Jan is from that end. It's then Samuel after Janis. Let me, Bjorn in the middle here. Yes, thank you. Gatis next to Bjorn and Cameron next to me. So we still have 2 initial interventions here, and let's begin with Samuel. Samuel Fulfari, Professor of Energy Geopolitics. It's, I mean, it's your moment now, because everything is about geopolitics these days and energy, right? Samuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I think that it's really time to take a new direction. It's dangerous what we are living today in Brussels, Strasbourg. And I think that it's important to understand that the world is not following Brussels, Strasbourg. The world is not following what the EU is doing. And the problem is that we look too much around us in a ghetto, and we refuse to see what is occurring in the world, which is the reverse of the decarbonization policy. But first of all, I would like to say that I worked 36 years in the European Commission, and for many years there was no politics. We were there just to fulfill the obligation of the treaty and to implement policies to deliver cheap and abundant energy to the industry and to the citizen. And our aim was just that. We need to have energy. And we were looking, of course, at the market, international market, but the aim was, yes, we need energy. Security of supply. Because without energy, we collapse. Energy is life. And then, progressively, after the Maastricht Treaty, politics start to enter into the energy policy. Slightly, but progressively. Mrs. Merkel formed its first government at the end of 2005, without the Green, with SPD. A few months after, she asked the President of the Commission, Mr. Barroso, to develop a roadmap for renewable energy. Why? Because since 1973, in October, it will be 50 years, we have tried to find new alternative energies. We don't look for alternative energy because of climate change. That's a joke. We look to alternative to ensure our security of supply. 50 years of research, development, financing of renewable energy. After 50 years, we have 3%. Please remember this number. Wind and solar represent 3% of the primary energy in the EU. In the world is the same, 3%. And Mrs. Merkel say, well, this is not good. We spend so much money and we have just peanuts. We should oblige industry to produce renewable energy. And then we broke down completely the market. I know perfectly because I was the drafter of the directive. I am an official, I was an official, I was obliged to obey. And I drafted in August 2006, in the summer, the first draft of the RED 1, Renewable Energy Directive 1, obliging people to produce renewable energy. 20% in 2020. You imagine, 20% in 2020. So this is a slogan. This is not science, this is not economic. And people start to say, this is competitive. Of course, it's in the market. And not only that, we give priority to the most expensive way to produce energy in the network. And of course, this was possible because the Commission said, you can finance that with public money. Total disruption of the market. The most expensive energy receives subsidies to fight with the other which do not receive subsidies. Then arrive progressively the Greens, and they insist more and more and more and more. In 2018, a revision of the directive with a new objective of renewable energy, and then everybody was saying, you see, it's competitive. I ask a question. If it is competitive, why do you oblige people to make it? And now, presently, big discussion for renewal, RED 3, revision of the directive. And again, people repeat, it's competitive, it's very cheap. Yes, it's very cheap when you produce electricity. But there is so much impact on the network that we know all that the price of electricity increase. The price of electricity increased in Europe not because of the war in Ukraine, but because of the obligation to produce renewable energy. Not only that, no, we are obliged to produce hydrogen. I made my PhD on hydrogen. And when I joined the Commission, I worked with the Common Research Center in ISPRA on hydrogen. And it was a fantastic period in ISPRA because ISPRA started to work in 1960 on hydrogen production. But it was with nuclear, not with renewables. And then in 2000, Mr. Bush convinced Mr. Prodi, saying, no, we don't like Kyoto, but we should do something. Let's try to do something with hydrogen. Everybody working on hydrogen. And then it collapsed because there is no sense. And in July 2020, Mrs. von der Leyen said, the solution, hydrogen. It's ridiculous. Hydrogen is the precious molecule for the base of the chemical industry. And to burn it is like to burn a Louis Vuitton handbag to heat your house. It's precious. It's the base of the chemistry. All the chemical industry and the petrochemical use hydrogen. And you want to burn that? It's a nonsense. Of course, industry following the Commission because there is a lot of money. 450 billions. You know, with public money, you can justify everything. 450 billions. So I think that it's time to come back to earth and say, well, we have been too far. It's time to stop this because the world is not following us. We will come back to that in the second part of the discussion if you want.
Probably this is a point at which I shall make a remark. Let's go with Chatham House rule, right?
Too late.
Okay, no. I'm a man trying to somehow.
I need your helmet, huh?
I was actually going to run for it myself, but let's see what Cameron has to say prior to kicking off the heated discussion, as I believe it will be. So, Cameron, the floor is yours. Briefly introduce yourself and your points, and then, if we are lucky, we can have about 25 minutes of live discussion.
Thank you very much. I'll try and be as brief as possible. My name's Cameron. I'm the head of communications for the Conservative Environment Network in the United Kingdom. We're a forum of over 150 Conservative parliamentarians who support net zero, nature restoration and resource security. It won't surprise you, therefore, that I'm coming with a slightly different and more optimistic message on renewables. And I would like to share with you today the UK's renewable story and why British Conservatives are leading and delivering on the transition to renewables. Briefly, just a quick introduction to the UK, and we're slightly different in Europe. We are an oil and gas producing nation. Prior to Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, we imported very little from Russia. Only roughly around 4% of our gas and 9% of our oil came from Russia. But we are not energy independent. We rely on imports in order to meet our gas demands, meet our electricity demands. In response to this crisis, we have oddly become a net exporter of electricity for the first time in 44 years. Because we have had quite a good year in terms of renewables, and because while we normally import electricity from France to meet our demand, because of the French problem with some of their nuclear reactors, we've been sending energy the other way. But we also have quite a lot of infrastructure regarding LNG, so we've been acting as a kind of land bridge. So as LNG comes to Europe, we export it, and we've actually imported 74% more LNG, and then to meet our own needs and export it to neighbouring European countries through pipelines. The lesson from us, this crisis for the UK, though, is we may have our own oil and gas. We may have relied very little on Russia for fossil fuels, but we have still seen enormous increases in energy prices. It's not because of renewables, it's because the price of oil and gas is set on an international level. And while we rely heavily on fossil fuels, we are exposed to Putin's energy war games. As he restricts supply and as European nations rightfully try and buy less Russian supplies in response to the war, to defund Putin, prices shoot up. And that impacts us, even though we have our own oil and gas. So what began as an effort to combat climate change has now become about energy security. And we are responding to this crisis, and we are a country, by the way, we have a policy of maximising the oil and gas production in the North Sea. So the taps aren't being turned off. Very much we are doing what we can to maximise the amount we get out. But it's not enough. It's not enough for us. It's not enough for Europe. It's not enough to defeat Russia's energy dominance when it comes to fossil fuels. So we're moving to renewables, and we're accelerating that. Since 2010, successive Conservative governments have scaled up renewables. We've gone from 7% of our electricity supply being supplied by renewables to 44% today. By 2030, 95% of our electricity is going to come from low-carbon solutions. That includes nuclear. And by 2035, we will have fully decarbonised our electricity grid. In order to achieve energy security, we have enormous renewable ambitions now. We want to increase our amount of offshore wind, where, by the way, we have the first, second, third, and fourth largest offshore wind farms in the world, but also 7 out of the top 10. We're going to increase that to up to 50 gigawatts. We're going to have up to 70 gigawatts of solar. We're going to build 8 new nuclear reactors, approving them by 2030, and we're doubling our capacity to produce hydrogen. All of this, and it's almost an all-of-the-above strategy when it comes to energy security. It's a real energy mix. But ultimately, by building more renewables and reducing our reliance on oil and gas, we are going to lower prices for consumers. And we are doing this with a market-led mechanism called contracts for difference. Basically, how this works, we give investors confidence of the price they can sell electricity produced by their renewable project by launching an auction where the investors compete for a guaranteed price. What this does, it gives them confidence of what they can sell their electricity for, but because of the auction, because of the market that creates, it drives down the price. So we managed to, in the last auction, secure 11 gigawatts, a record amount, of renewable investment at record low prices. At the time of that auction, they were 9 times cheaper than gas power. 4 times before the crisis. So this is not just because the price of gas has shot up. Renewables have genuinely plummeted in terms of their costs and in terms of the energy they produce. And if we weren't so committed to renewables over the winter, we would have, in 44% of our electricity comes from renewables. The consequence would have been we would have had to import more gas. Because of our renewables, over the last winter, we managed to save British consumers £15 billion. And one element of the Contracts for Difference scheme is because it's not particularly a subsidy. So the guaranteed price works. So if the market price goes below the guaranteed price, yes, the Treasury and British consumers would step in to subsidise. However, the prices have come down so much and the price of gas has gone up by such a considerable amount, when the market price for energy is above that guaranteed price, these firms pay back to British consumers. Last year it was 700 million. This year it's going to be about 1.4 billion pounds. And that's how we're going to get out of this. That's how the UK is approaching it. And as we move away from oil and gas, we will we will ease the pressure for LNG demand, enabling other countries who need it now to diversify away from Russian supplies, to do so more easily, but equally make it easier for us to secure the gas that we will continue to need in the short term. And ultimately, yes, there are costs with this. Renewables are cheaper now, and they are producing record low prices of electricity in the UK. But there will be, of course, as has been mentioned, cost to the grid. But let's put this in some context here. To achieve the 50 gigawatts of offshore wind, and by the way, we've got 100 gigawatts in the pipeline. Companies are throwing themselves at this. It's more the government and our planning rules are too slow to realise it, more than there's not enough investment coming. But to realise this, we're going to have to spend something in the region of £54 billion to upgrade our grid by the end of the decade. But let's put that in some context. The UK government had to spend £40 billion to subsidise households and businesses because of high gas prices this winter alone. We cannot afford to stay hooked on oil and gas and be heavily dependent on it. Yes, there's a role to play, but it's diminishing. And we cannot have, and this is the lesson from this crisis, we cannot have energy security so long as we are heavily dependent on fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not leaving yet. I'm just grabbing the helmet because I'm afraid we might need that. So just raise your hand once somebody needs that. So, right. So, by the way, do you know how this plant is called? It's called Alchemilla vulgaris. It grows in Latvia and the Baltic states. It also grows in South Tyrolean Alps, quite high actually in the mountains, up to 2,000 meters roughly. Let's divert the attention from the dichotomies I noticed here over the last 10-15 minutes, but back to the serious business of energy. Jani, I want to start with you, actually. Did you notice any changes in the supply of natural gas to the gas storage and intercounts over the last, 18 months roughly? What happened? What was the experience of the gas storage operator once the high prices kicked in? Was it really a big difference from historical supplies that we experienced prior to having these high prices? Very briefly, let's try to do it in like 2-minute bursts really quickly so that everybody can have a chance to speak.
Of course, everything changed. So since March, there were no Russian supplies almost. And
you mean March 22, right?
March 22, yeah. And we as a storage operator actually started providing the physical injection capacity as a storage, considering that everyone will try to store the gas or try to acquire new reserves for the next period, and they will want to store it. That was a correct decision to provide the injection capacity. So the market reacted to it and started to accumulate gas since March. Also, Latvenergo,
which is Latvia's state-owned company.
State-owned company producing electricity. They also reviewed their production strategy and actually saved gas for the next winter too. With the start of operations of GIPL, actually for everyone it was a slight surprise that the first cargoes or the first flows of gas went towards Poland rather than towards Baltics. But then the market situation changed and GIPL started to provide more and more gas towards Baltics. With this spring, with the start of operation of Inco terminal, we see a steady flow from Finland towards Latvia, and gas is currently going for injection from all the 3 sources. It's a GIPL, it's Klaipėda terminal, it's a new Inco terminal. Yeah, and maybe what is very important to notice, wider Baltics no longer imports Russian gas in any form.
That is an extraordinary change, isn't it? Like in 12 months from, for Latvia and Estonia, in 12 months from 100% to 0% of reliance on one single supplier, right? So I wonder if it actually demonstrates the flexibility that stems not only from the presence of infrastructure, and that means strategic planning, because that infrastructure was planned a long time ago by the Commission, by the way, Samuel. Thank you to the Commission, which had a strategic vision on how things should be. Probably it foresaw some certain risks there that stemmed from the limited infrastructure, but it basically demonstrated that the changes in gas prices actually had also impacts on how we perceive the role of infrastructure, right? I think it demonstrated quite clearly that if there is no infrastructure, the molecules cannot flow. If there are no wires, the electrons cannot be transmitted between supply and demand side. So, and I know that you might be willing to say something, Samuel. You basically said that you mentioned subsidies, and actually it hooked me. Because you said the subsidy to renewables was so significant that actually the cost of renewables is quite high. My observation is really that quite a number of countries in the EU, in fact, actually did subsidize fossil fuel, albeit indirectly as well, so for quite many years, and including coal, in Germany, and probably Poland as well, but also natural gas as well through subsidizing investment in so-called base generation capacities. So I think it's not that simple. I probably would not be in the same...
She was right, no subsidies. Yes. No subsidies. If you want to have a market, no subsidies.
Yes, definitely. One thing which puzzles me is also, and I appreciate also your contribution from the perspective perspective of new, actually developing nuclear technologies. I really do believe in science, absolutely, in R&D, and R&D actually indicates that there is plenty of investment in R&D regarding SMRs and these small modular reactors and advanced small modular reactors, so, and also the technology that you presented here. I believe that today we do not know exactly how the energy system will look like in 20 years. That's my bet. Actually, I do not know. I actually admit that I don't know everything. I mean, I cannot know everything. There's like thousands of indexed publications, right, out there. So there's plenty of studies. But if I look at LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, from a very respectable source like Lazard's LCOE index, which has been ongoing now, I think it's 15th or 16th edition now, I still see that that nuclear, if it would have to kick in tomorrow, would still be quite costly. Do you think we have any chance to see that this LCOE for certain nuclear technologies actually would drop like in 7-10 years time? Because why 7-10 years? Because it's the normal investment, so it's a normal period of time between investment and when you start reaping the fruit from investment, right, in energy sector. It takes some time. Maybe you can, either Samuel or Bjorn, or Samuel first and then Bjorn.
First of all, I would like to say that it's true that the Commission has financed and pushed for the interconnection in the north of Europe. But do you know that the Parliament prohibit that? The European Parliament say no more financing for infrastructure to bring gas across Europe, except hydrogen. So you see the contradiction. You have the solution, thanks to the interconnectors, but no one say no more. We do not need that, because everything, you say that we don't know the future. Of course we know. In Strasbourg and Brussels, the future is 100% renewable. This is the future. So everything in Strasbourg and Brussels is one aim, 100% renewable. This is the aim. And do you know that yesterday in Paris, there was a meeting of 11 countries, 10 member states and UK, to try to create an alliance for nuclear energy. Because this is a taboo in Brussels. We have a treaty, Euratom, but Germany, Austria, and a few others do not want. And so countries are obliged to meet in Paris to prepare the future of nuclear, because there is, of course, a future for nuclear, whatever the cost it is. The demand of electricity in the world will be so high that we cannot afford to neglect the nuclear energy. And as Björn said, there is a lot of development everywhere in the world on this new type of nuclear. And the cost will be reduced, of course, as it has been the case for all technologies. So yes, there is a bright future for nuclear energy.
Yeah, Björn, what's the industry's take on it?
Here, speaking as an energy economist, so the question is twofold. One is the role of LCOE, and the second, what about LCOE in nuclear energy? The notion of LCOE is highly problematic in the energy discussion, because for a policymaker, you need to understand the system cost for the customers. That's the burden, the energy burden, cost burden for a society. LCOE is an economic measure at the socket of the power plant. And it's only a notion that is there for measuring, for example, highly useful for a utility to judge which investments would I take. You do it depending on the LCOE. But for a political debate, we should ban this notion of LCOE, levelized cost of energy, because it's totally useless. And why? It used to be useful when we always had dispatchable versions or varieties of nuclear power generation. With weather-dependent energy forms, you socialize the cost burden and you privatize the gain, and that's why, for example, the contracts for difference models, they will have to vanish once better sources of energy are there. And now so this is LCOE. Please forget about it in a political debate. It's a totally strange notion and we should ban it in a debate. But now for the cost situation for nuclear energy, we are unfortunately used here in Europe to the cost overruns and timeline overruns of Hinkley Point C, Olkiluoto 3, and Vogtle in the US. But if you take a project like Barakah in the United Arab Emirates, it has been built for $24 billion for nuclear reactors, totally for 5.6 gigawatt in power, and it will be about $55 per megawatt hour. So it is highly competitive even in today's environment. So that's about the cost of coal. And if you look what the development is, there are a few vendors, SMR vendors in particular, that have a cost issue. I won't name them now, but for example, Westinghouse has presented a couple of weeks ago in Atlanta. I was in the room. Their AP300 with a clear cost target of $50 per megawatt hour cost. That's LCOE is not including the cost. So LCOE is always lower because LCOE is the cost only, but not incorporating the gain, the profits the utility has to make in order to pay back the investment and to financing it. And then there is the new generation of nuclear power, and take Copenhagen Atomics, and not to mention only dual fluid, but they have on their website that their target price is an LCOE of 22 euros per megawatt hour. Ours will be in that range, and a few others as well. So, and once they are there, nobody can justify a contract for difference of 60, 70, 80.
I have to, thank you, Bjorn. I have a twist here that I can introduce. I'm just a messenger, I'm a moderator, I'm trying to be neutral and ask difficult questions. So, but still I have my helmet here. Difficult. And there's water on the table as well, but it's for drinking, not for spilling it. So I'm happy to hear what I hear here. But I'll leave Gottis for the last response here and want to jump over to Cameron. Right, so basically UK has been keen in utilizing nuclear energy for ages. Basically now it's embracing totally the renewables, and there have been like dozens of calculations of what is better for the UK, especially from the consumer's perspective. And I've heard many an answer regarding that, but Bjorn also mentioned push out. Basically, I think you said push out, so that nuclear will push out the fossils, that it's going to be the nuclear. But from your perspective, because you very interestingly presented the approach that the UK might have or can have or is able to have and afford as well in terms of changing the energy system, and it can actually be replicated to some other parts of Europe as well. So do you think it's going to be a phase out or a push out of fossil fuels from your perspective?
Yeah, it's going to be a transition. Nobody's going to turn the taps off. We will continue to use fossil fuels until 2050 and a small amount beyond that date. We'll continue the policy of maximum extraction in the North Sea, but as policymakers now, and I do think nuclear is going to play a big part in how we achieve some of our climate goals and our energy security goals. The UK envisages about 25% of its energy demands coming from nuclear. We have kind of had a malaise of building nuclear power plants. There seems to be the political will is back there now, but if you're a policymaker sat in Westminster at the moment, the reality is that nuclear power while important and while we need to get on building it now, because we're going to need it in the future, is quite expensive. Whereas we have investors lining up to build offshore wind farms, some of which are bigger than the Shard now, or the same size, which are going to power millions of homes for significantly cheaper amounts of money. And if we get the planning system simplified, they are quicker to build as well. So we'll start delivering and contributing to our energy security sooner. That's not an argument against nuclear. We need to do both. But very much, renewables are the quickest way that we can start to reduce our reliance, reduce our exposure to volatile international fossil fuel markets, and ultimately achieve our energy security goals.
Yeah, the time is unforgiving. I think I thank you really for this perspective. It sort of supplies us with an alternative approach. No, I'm just kidding. I think
it's not really alternative. I think it's just different timescales. I totally agree that in the short run we will have to do this.
Agreed.
And my sentence of pushing out something is by mid-century. So therefore we are not in total disagreement. No helmets needed.
Consensus. So there's certain role for every technology, in certain, if you look at the broader spectrum of time scale or time scales, right? So the clock is ticking, and I officially announced that we will add 5 minutes more to the official time. So right, so we've covered actually a number of technologies here and roles of different sorts of technologies. But Gati, as a representative of electricity transmission system operator, there's plenty of challenges regarding connecting to the grid various sources of power generation. It's not only about, it's about connecting any big source, right? Be it cumulatively or in a distributed manner. Would you say which one, is it distributed generation or one big power source of producing power in a centralized way that would potentially be the bigger challenge for the transmission system? Say one bigger source could be either a conventional nuclear power plant, for example, or like 5 SMRs, or an offshore wind park of 10 gigawatts of cumulative capacity in the Baltic Sea, right?
That's right. Any solution, I would say, that again, like it was already voiced today, that balanced approach, diverse approach is the best. Any solution would have its pros and cons. Big centralized power plants, of course, have this bigger N-1 risk, like we observed approximately months ago in Sweden, where 2 nuclear blocks disconnected, and it caused a serious incident in a system. Distributed sources, again, they can cause congestions in distribution grid, sometimes also in transmission grids. This is something that we have to deal with afterwards. So, therefore, both solutions are valid and necessary. But I think what is even more relevant at this time, for example, in Latvia last year, due to high prices, there was a particularly high influx of connection requests. And in Latvia, for instance, it was above 7 gigawatts. Peak demand is 1.2 gigawatts, so it's relatively big. But at the moment, what we have is at transmission level 3 real connection agreements concluded only. So in my view, the biggest challenge at the moment is not the technical connection, but the biggest challenge is this commercial side. Because markets, the short-term markets, now we have energy short-term spot price, now also balancing markets. We don't have long-term contracts, just the short-term auctions. They are super helpful for transmission system operators because they help to balance the system. They indicate where and how to allocate resources every day. But they do not perform so well as an investment signal. And therefore, now, especially today, when there is a discussion and proposals how to amend the market directive, I think this is the most serious topic that has to be tackled. Like in UK, there was an example, like CFD contracts could be a solution. There might be some other capacity mechanisms. There might be a PPA contract motivation. Any solution which provides this investment security, in my view, currently is the biggest challenge.
Well, indeed, and I think there is also no silver bullet in terms of solutions to this issue as well. I mean, the financial aspects definitely are there. They are still to remain, and I'm not even sure, having seen the proposal from the Commission on the electricity market design reform, I'm not sure really if that is going to provide all the solutions required. Probably it's a dynamic process anyway. There's no single point in time after which we can say, well, the system is ready now, it's going to function for 1,000 years. So most likely it's going to be dynamic, and the industry will probably be at the forefront of telling the rest of the world, okay, we are ready to do this, and we are ready to invest in this and that, and most likely it will represent a spectrum of solutions. Most likely there is going to be investment and willingness to invest in renewables. There's going to be willingness to invest also in R&D and deployments of SMRs. Probably it will be also, there will be probably a discussion about investing in full-size, full-scale nuclear power plants. Still, there will be gas as a transitional fuel, not only away from fossils completely, but also as a, well, blue methane exchange for green methane, most likely because the molecule physically, chemically is the same, so there's only the source is different. There'll also be hydrogen, or as Samuel said, no, who said it? Samuel, burning Louis Vuitton bags for heating the home, which would be actually a nice suggestion. It will be like a contemporary art action, so that would be fun to see that. But I'm afraid that we've exhausted our time here, but believe me, I did enjoy every minute of the discussion here, all of the interventions here. So please join me in the round of applause for this wonderful panel. There is only so much time that there is, and yes, we are like 2 minutes over our official time, but well, this time shall I say gentlemen, it's the gentleman's club here this time, but it's been my pleasure. Jānis Eisaks, Samuel Fufari, Bjorn Peters, or Peters, I don't know, Gatis Junghans and Cameron Smith, and myself humbly thank you for watching this panel, and the floor is over to Robert. I didn't need this.
Okay, so. So dear colleagues, so I think we all enjoyed this expertise that we have here today. Also in the first panel, they were mostly ladies. As you remember, after lunchtime we took over, so gentlemen, and that's why, but on a serious note, I really can say that experts spoke from different perspectives on many angles, and I think it was good. I actually sometimes afraid when we made the composition of speakers, so perhaps it will create some how to say, different angles of different problems, but I think it fits very well, and a lot of political issues also. You could disagree with those political views, but I think you have to take into account that they are existing. And also from the expert side, from gas infrastructure for grid operators, from academical side, I think from the geopolitical dangerous aspects, it was absolutely brilliant. And thank you very much for all experts who were participating today. I just will give you at the end some summary points, because always after such events we remember next day maybe 20%, so after a few days we remember 10%, after 1 week we perhaps remember 5 or even less percent, and after 1 year you remember maybe 1%. But I will try to create my own and share with you some summary, which I would like also to keep you on your own, because sometimes you have to dig in your memory and also to understand how my own experience fits with today's knowledge, what I got from different experts. So, so the first about politics. Well, I'm 20 years in Brussels, so maybe not so, like Samuel already mentioned me. I don't know how many years you were drafting all those projects, so I am on legislator side for many years before. I also was, before your opening section, on the council side indirectly, because we were not yet members of European Union before 2004 in Latvia. But so I can really say that you remind me some absolutely brilliant memories with 20% in 2020, or triple 20, I think, or as you mentioned. So I already forgot it. I have seen it, but I forgot it. So. And also a very interesting point was what you mentioned also about this burning hydrogen. So it is like Louis Vuitton bags, even if it would be China-made anyway, it's pretty stupid to burn to heat house, so, but it's too costly anyway. So, but into 2023, this year, we had when we had the legislation part of the package of Fit for 55 concerning don't burn wood for energy. There were Greens members staying at the Strasbourg Parliament and make big demonstrations, don't burn wood. So for Latvians and for this area in Baltic states, I think it's pretty discussable, is it right approach or not? Of course, we can follow any cascade principles and so on in a wood business, so, but we have to understand also what fits for this time as a best opportunity when the war is going on and geopolitical things has changed in the energy sector. So, and also about this, how it created politics in Brussels. So it was very interesting. So, well, for many years I see before trialogues, when Parliament started to negotiate with Council, for Parliament is more important to just say, look, let's do tactics like that, make a very short implementation terms for particular steps in legislation, particular in energy sector as well, and then we will make a bargain and we will be in the middle with Council. So that's it. And it's not a rocket science actually. So it means there are, as arguments, there are only mainly tactical views, not expertise behind that. So, and it's really bad, and I think it's we cannot legislate like that in the future. And with those dates, it's also an interesting point. I am using one other conference recently. Who remember what was the Lisbon strategy 2010 for? What was the aim of this Lisbon strategy of European Union? I will say you, the aim was to create in Europe the most competitive and dynamic knowledge-based economy in the world, capable of sustainable economic growth with more and better jobs and greater social cohesion by 2010. Now it's 2023, do we succeed? Do somebody speaking about it that we didn't succeed in 2023? And I really guess that sometimes with the new those targets for 2030, 2035, or for the in transport sector, with the new cars and other things for 2040, 2050, we will try not to come back to this issue in 2040, 2050. I'm almost sure that would be the same case. This, like we are not, is how politics are fortunately sometimes done on EU level. I hope we can do better, and we will see how public react next year on elections and for new commission, and how it would be elections in some member states before that. So I think it's important issues to be more serious, because since the war started, we are in a different situation. Geopolitical shifts are going on, and we have to be finally serious. On some other things, which is also, I'm really thankful to Yanis Isaacs about this, showing that there was how to say, indirectly, there was a problem in gas sector could arise from overcapacity issues, because there was when last year started, everybody wanted to have their own LNG, each small member state. So, and if you would create in any member state LNG, so what will happen after? when it's enough for Baltic sector and Finnish market, it's enough capacity already now, and we just have to use, in the best economical sense, this gain what we can get from this supply security point of view, not so much independence, which is for small country in energy policy is not the solution. I am really thankful for this dual fluid nuclear. It was very interesting for me to see, Björn, about your presentation. I'm an economist by education. I can follow from economical point of view, but I think from political point of view, there is a really dangerous in Europe, and you, as I understand, now based in Vancouver. So it's a Canadian company. This is not in Europe. So, and of course, if currently majority is not to develop with public money, support R&D in nuclear sector, and we already touched the points that hydrogen produced from nuclear, is it green or not green, which is still going on in the last few days. Well, I think we can make in Europe huge mistakes with this issue. So if we will not to develop and not to support nuclear and just follow this romantic green line, to my experience and my knowledge as well. And one more from indirectly from what we discussed today. We had before Easter from European Parliament Transport Committee meeting in Genova, which you know Italian port place, and we had a leader of our group of the committee is a French green member. And she started to say to Italian business community from Genova port and also academicians that, well, why you have a huge part, we can look on future about the ships driven by batteries. So Italians said, well, you can go from Genova port to across this rock and to go to Portofino Bay. You can do it, it's not very far from there with some electric battery boat, but you cannot bring containers from China with a battery board because it sunk down the ship. So, and there was so many other things which, of course, also reminded that the problem how we developed, and also I think Björn touched this in his presentation, that when we driven from coal to oil and also shipping business, it was just efficiency. Because it was, you don't need to bring so much coal on the ship, and it was efficient, it was more cheap, it was more efficient. In this case, if you artificially driving all the costs to put on public money or cross subsidies, you cannot succeed on so quickly to change all the sources of energy, how you can do in mobility business, not only in shipping, but in any other place. So I think it's very important. And I would like to finalize my own memories from and think about the future of energy sector. I hope it's here. It's me. It was just a few weeks before pandemic went away. This place is Uyuni, Salt Lake in Bolivia, where I was happy to be. And if you have opportunity in your life, please go there. It was wet season. It was like a mirror, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's huge lake with 100 kilometers, if I correctly remember, in 70 kilometers long and wide. But why I'm showing this is the biggest mining resources for lithium in the world. And there, of course, are interest. And after this visit of this lake, I also have seen, I've been shown some Bolivian mountain where it was rented by President Moraes that time to Western companies. There was a silver in this mountain or some other things to Western companies for 25 years. They moved the church of local people, native people, down. They constructed the same church and they created some buildings. Native people were very happy, so they said, life is okay, so they got some money for that. And the mountain disappeared almost. Not in 25 years, but in 10 years' time. And it was rented. So this is a question, do we really think that we are doing very green if we will try to fight for resources like lithium and others and to destroy such a kind of global beauties for next generations and to say, look, we are think about the future of the green life. So at the same time, with the electricity would be driven, those scooters whom I hate. Here in Riga, you can go out and you will see they are just throwing everywhere, and it's made in China, made with a pretty brutal way, so with not servicing resources. So it's very important how we think about I think everybody here in the audience would like to see our next generations, our children, grandchildren will live in a nice world, but we have to be serious and responsible and to think all the nitty-gritty details, how it was knitted together, and what we have to think much more deeply than just to see the first part of the chain and you don't see the next one white. So thank you very much once more, and thank you for our audience, also those who follow us in a social network. So thank you very much, and I hope it was very useful. And let's remember something from this great expertise from today. Thank you.